a good way to start a meeting. Getting you to sit down. Okay. Welcome to Hammersmith and Fulham's council meeting, including our guests in the audience and those watching on YouTube. I'm Councillor Patricia Quigley, Mayor of the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. I would like to be simply addressed as Mayor. This is a hybrid meeting where councillors may be contributing from home as well as from here in the chamber. Members joining remotely cannot participate or vote on decision reports. To make the meeting more accessible, we will be supported by British Sign Language interpreters. The meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, and by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. I once again welcome our guests in the audience to this meeting. This is the most important civic meeting of the council. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly, no heckling is allowed, nor any other type of interruption will be tolerated when people are speaking. This is a personal request, as I am hard of hearing and need good order to manage the meeting effectively. Councillors, if the whip had not provided me with your name and you wish to speak, please raise your hand and wait until I call you. If you wish to raise a point under standing orders, please raise your hand and I will invite you to speak at a suitable point. When called to speak, please state the standing order you wish to use. Please wait patiently and do not interrupt the person speaking. If you wish to raise a point of order or personal explanation, you may interrupt the councillor speaking. However, please ensure your points are factual, brief, and to the point. Please be patient. At the end of each debate or report, I will formally put the recommendations or motions to the vote. For any councillors joining on Zoom, please keep your microphone muted unless you are speaking. I would also like to remind members it is customary to stand when speaking if you are able to, so you can be clearly seen and heard. If you are watching at home and would like to follow along with the agenda, there is a link in the description on YouTube. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting calmly by the nearest exit, which is through the door on the right and out the main entrance. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Black Road. The meeting will be taken as adjourned until it can be safely resumed business. Toilets can be found through the door at the back of the room on my right. Apologies for absent. Sharon, do we have any?
Thank you, Mayor, we do. So apologies have been received from Councillor David Morton, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Kwan, Councillor Jones, Councillor Rosenberg, Councillor Carmel, Councillor Trehe, and for lateness, Councillor Perez.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Item 3. Are the minutes of the council meeting held on the 22nd of January agreed? Item 4. The anniversary of the war in Ukraine. On Monday, the 24th of February, marked the 3rd year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I invite the leader of the council to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. It is with sadness that we remember that it is just 3 years ago on Monday that Vladimir Putin sent his tanks in through the Donbass and in through Belarus to illegally attack the innocent and peaceful country of Ukraine. Since then, murderous Russian soldiers have killed tens of thousands of innocent Ukrainian citizens. It is to the credit of everybody in the United Kingdom on a cross-party basis that who immediately saw Putin for what he was and organized radical support, proving once again that Britain will not stand by when innocent countries are attacked. It is therefore particularly prescient this year that we recognize that the perilous situation the Ukrainians find themselves in has not gone away, and therefore we reaffirm our strong commitment and steadfast support for President Zelensky and that brave government and brave people's fight for their freedom. Anyone who visits the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham will note that the Ukrainian flag has stood not only outside our town hall, but within every council office where we have major meetings. It is important to remind everybody that this is a once-in-a-generation fight. I therefore think I speak for everybody in this chamber in reasserting that across Britain, people look to a just peace, which involves winning the war against Vladimir Putin. And we reaffirm that, and we'll keep reaffirming that until that victory happens in the Ukraine. Thank you.
Councillor Banfell, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to say that we agree with what Councillor Cowan has just said. It is a sadness that we have to mention this just before every budget council because of the invasion only 2 days previously, 3 years ago. The only thing I will add is that I would like to thank the many generous Hammersmith and Fulham residents who so kindly welcomed Ukrainians into their home when the invasion started. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Can we please now bow our heads for a minute of silence? Thank you. Councillor Laura James, Honorary King's Counsel. Is she here? Where are you, Laura? Good, I can see you now. In January, His Majesty the King approved the award of 9 new Honorary King's Counsel, awarded to those who have made a major contribution to the law of England and Wales outside practice in the courts. One of the 9 was our very own Councillor Laura James, who was nominated for her contributions to the legal profession, promoting access to justice. Her work to drive policy changes representing vulnerable individuals in prison, advocating for the rights of children and young people in custody, and reforms to the imprisonment for the public protection IPP sentence. On behalf of the council, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Jones on this honour. Laura, well done, well deserved. Item 5, public questions. Question one. Mr. Mooney, you want to come forward, please? I invite Brian Mooney to ask the question to Councillor Sharon Holder, Cabinet Member for Public Realm. Please can you read your question, Mr. Mooney?
Good evening, Mayor Quigley, fellow residents, and especially Councillor Holder. The Air Quality Action Plan and emission-based parking charges were recently approved. Cabinet meeting minutes, 16th of December, show that when asked if Council was going to consult over parking issues before implementing any changes, the leader confirmed that consulting with residents was key to the way that Council operated. Prior consultation on the swinging parking charges was also recommended by the Council Officer report for the 7th of October Cabinet meeting. Was a decision to dispense with it related to very adverse reaction from residents over the unfulfilled promise of emission-based parking for less and even free parking?
Thank you. I invite the Cabinet Member to provide a response, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Mooney. Hammersmith and Fulham is the 10th worst area in England for air pollution, with 7.4% of deaths in the borough linked to toxic air. Road pollution is the biggest culprit, and doing nothing is simply not an option for Hammersmith and Fulham. Almost 7,000 residents took part in a borough-wide parking survey prior to the Cabinet report of October 2024. There was strong support for the idea of charging higher charges to the highest polluters. This informed the Cabinet decision to introduce emission-based banding to help tackle dangerous levels of air pollution. As promised at the December Cabinet, the actual charges went through the statutory consultation process. As a result of representation received from motorcycle lobby, or the motorcycle lobby anyhow, on behalf of the residents during that process, further consultation work is being carried out on a revised charging schedule for motorcycles.
Thank you.
I would like to thank Councillor Holder for that fairly concise answer. I would like to really pick on the last thing that she said, really. There was a consultation with the motorcycle lobby, which is news to me, but the law on consultations is that if somebody is deprived of a benefit, for instance, motorists, then you should make a special effort to go out and consult that party that's being disadvantaged. There was a very clear commitment to consultation at one of the Cabinet meetings, and I think that gives rise to what's called legitimate expectation in law. Now, I'm not going to ask you to come up with an off-the-cuff legal opinion, but if I write to you with the legal details supporting that case, perhaps you'd be good enough to come back to me within the week and maybe copy other people in the room as well, because it's a matter of much unhappiness for residents.
Mr. Mooney, sorry.
Do you have a response, Councillor Holder?
Mr. Mooney, I would be more than happy to come back to you. But as you know, the legal profession, a week is a very short time in anybody's books to try and get a response. But I will definitely come back to you if you send me your legal opinion.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mooney. This is the end of the public questions. Item 6, committee reports. 6.1, the results of the London Government by-election on the 20th of February 2025. The council is requested to note that the report on the results of the local government by-election on the 20th of February 2025. Before I invite the Chief Whip to speak, I'd like to welcome Councillors Lydia Painter and Callum Nimmo to the council, and extend our thanks to all the staff who supported the election for their hard work and professionalism. I'd also actually like to thank all the candidates that did stand and wish them luck. And as just from a personal point of view, Callum, welcome to team Hammersmith Broadway, and wish you very good luck work. I invite Councillor Matt Smith to speak on this item, please.
Thank you, Mayor, and I largely echo what you just said. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Lydia and Callum to this council and to this Labour group. You've made us all very proud in the dedication and the commitment that you've shown in the campaign, and I know you'll make the residents of Lily and Hammersmith Broadway just as proud. I'd also like to thank, as the Mayor did, the election workers, those who counted the ballots, those who worked at the polling stations, the police, law enforcement team, and of course, Zoe and her fantastic election team, who've run another amazing, smooth election. And finally, last but not least, I would thank all the other candidates who stood, all the organisers who put time in, and all the activists who put time in on a winter by-election, which I'm sure not everyone would have welcomed when it was called, but which was fought fairly and vibrantly. And as we've just heard from the leader about and the leader of the opposition about the horrors that we see in the Ukraine and also threats that we see elsewhere in the world, we can't take these moments of democracy for granted. So thank you to everyone who took part in such a good spirit. But yeah, welcome to Callum and Lydia most of all. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Booker-Bampfala.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to echo your congratulations to the two new councillors, Councillor Nemo and Painter, and congratulate them on their success last week. I also would like to thank the other candidates, particularly our candidates who worked very hard, and thank Electoral Services and Sharon Lee as returning officer.
Thank you. Is the report noted? Item 6.2, allocation of seats and proportionality on committees. Is the report on the allocation of seats and proportionality on committees noted? Great. Item 6.3, revenue budget and the council tax levels 2025-26. I call upon the leader, Councillor Stephen Cowan, to move the report and its recommendations.
Thank you.
Leader, I just have to say something else. Thank you. The agreed convention is that the leader of the council and the leader of the opposition have unlimited time to speak on this report, and up to 3 other speakers from each side can speak for 5 minutes each. Councillor Townsend will sum up. I call on the leader of the council, Councillor Stephen Cowan, to speak. Leader.
Thank you. And if I'm going to start with thank yous, I would like to very much thank my dear colleague, Councillor Rowan Ree, and a whole variety of other people. So please forgive me if I thank Rowan, thank everyone in the Cabinet, thank all the councillors and all the committees that have given this such profound scrutiny. I'm particularly grateful to the leadership shown by our Chief Executive, Sharon Lee, and Savinda Kelsey, and indeed, I'm very grateful to the whole of the SLT and all the senior officers who've taken our programme of rigorous approach to finances to the heart and delivered that day in, day out in all circumstances. We have a budget this year, colleagues, that seeks to respond to public concerns. And any cursory look at those public concerns over the last 4 or 5 years will see a consistency in what they are. They remain the cost of living crisis for tens of thousands of people across Hammersmith and Fulham. The terrible state of the National Health Service remains a concern. Crime, the causes of crime, and the damage crime causes is a concern. Housing and the housing crisis remains top of the list. Climate change and the environment is something people want their elected representatives to operate on. And education, that sense that we can give our children a future and their best days are yet to come, is not only fundamental in the polls, it's key to every parent who cares about their children I've ever met. So these are the principles, these are the instructions from our boss, the electorate, to focus on these things. And that has been very much at the heart of this tight financial programme. We do it in a context of national financial crisis that has occupied this country for many years now. This inheritance the new government have just taken on is probably the worst inheritance any government has had in the post-war period since Margaret Thatcher took over in 1979. I've discussed this with many people, but this is one of the worst sets of circumstances. And if we look in the wider context, then what we also know about these recent times is that many things can happen, events can occur that throw you off course. If I'd said 10 years ago some of these things, it would have seemed fanciful. But when I ran through the list of pandemics, climate change and floods, war, demographic change, Brexit, and let's not forget Liz Truss, all these random acts of nature can cause havoc to our finances without ever being predictable. And just for the record, let us never forget that Liz Truss, in that short lettuce life that she was Prime Minister, cost this council £15 million in increased interest rates and inflation. £15 million, which we got nothing in return for, but just the type of example of what happens when incompetence reigns at a national level. Now, Monday, as we said earlier, marks the 3rd anniversary of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And it is just 83 and a half months since Putin released Novichok onto the streets of Britain. This is unprecedented to happen in Europe in the post-war period. So what does that mean for us here? Well, as we saw recently this week, it does look like we are in a new world. I've not watched a television programme where people have not been commenting that the rules-based order that governed the post-war world is up for grabs. And just like when the pandemic came, it was hard to recognise we are in a new era and our lives will change. This is a major change for us. Now, when David Cameron took over from Gordon Brown and he brought his friend Nick Clegg into office with him, defence spending in the UK was at 2.5%. Well, it's way below that now. Our army has dropped from 100,000 to 70,000. And Ben Wallace, on the 30th of January, who was a man all of us should respect across this chamber as the longest-serving Defence Secretary in the last government, said that our armed forces have been hollowed out. Now, as our government, our new government, seeks to fix that, to repair the wreckage, and to build up Britain's forces again so we can lead in Europe and defend our liberal values, then that will cost money. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister announced it will go to 2.5% by 2027, and in the next Parliament, we'll move to 3%. I would not be surprised if those figures went up rapidly and sooner than that, given the nature of the international climate. All of that would ask you, where is that money going to come from? And the answer is, it could come from local government, it could come from anywhere. So as we put this budget together, we do so with the understanding that the international situation will affect the national situation, will affect our local circumstances. But despite that, this is a prudent budget that tightly manages our finances and looks to be ready for whatever happens, just as we were in the pandemic. But it is also a budget that takes the innate optimism at the heart of our Labour values, that we can shape a better, brighter future for our citizens. And it seeks to drive that future through relentlessly, no matter what circumstances are thrown at us. So tonight, all Hammersmith and Fulham's councillors are asked to approve the following. All Hammersmith and Fulham's councillors. A balanced budget. To approve £12.3 million more of new investment on key frontline services for our residents. To approve capital investment of a staggering £532 million over the next 4 years. To approve a reserve strategy. When other councils are raiding reserves, Councillor Ree and his team have added £600,000 to our reserves in a consecutive year, bringing total reserves to £73.5 million. And we will manage to maintain Hammersmith and Fulham, this London borough, as having the third lowest council tax in our country. That's what we're asking you to prove. Now, someone once said, tax is the price we pay for living in a civilized society. I agree with that. But that tax has to be value for money. And too often it isn't. For us, 10 years ago, under the stewardship of my close friend, Councillor Max Schmidt, that meant introducing a ruthless financial efficiency programme. I can tell you tonight that that programme of renegotiating contracts, negotiating hard with developers, of cutting out layers of management, of finding modern technology to do things that used to be done in a much more convoluted way, has delivered a record £138 million of council savings. Not one service cut, lots of money to protect our residents and make sure we put their needs first. This is the biggest set of cuts in real terms that any administration has delivered over that period in history. And that is something all our residents, I know, want to see, and every single councillor should recognise the importance of that if they are serious about good public finances. Ruthless financial efficiency has meant, for example, that this year we will invest an extra £3.5 million in fighting crime and keeping people safe. That brings the total investment to £9.1 million. Already the greatest investment in crime fighting in Hammersmith and Fulham's history, and we are adding over £3.5 million more to it to shore that up. Now, I'm pleased to report that this new Labour government, with its change agenda, has already confirmed that there will be more police on the streets of Hammersmith and Fulham. And those police numbers are coming through, and very welcome they are too. But they will complement an activity by the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, led by my friend, Councillor Rebecca Harvey, that sees 72 law enforcement officers patrolling the streets, reminding people that we care about every single broken window, as well as every single person in this area. We have a novel gangs unit infiltrating organised crime and producing amazing results. We have extra money this year going to protect women who suffer violence against women and girls. And we have the most comprehensive and largest CCTV network in Britain. These are staggering figures. Now, let me offer a voice of caution here. I am always very dubious when I read crime figures, whether they go up or whether they go down. There is room for some questioning. But the crime figures in Hammersmith and Fulham show violent crime is down by 13.6%. Violent crime down 13.6%. Robberies down 10%. Burglaries down 9.5%. These are things that don't happen in other boroughs in terms of these investments. Tough on crime, well, acting to eliminate the causes of crime is a Labour value. This staggering £9.1 million investment is that Labour value in action. Now, ruthless financial efficiency means this year we will not just invest in crime, we will put an extra 2.8 million into adult social care, bringing the total spend to over £70 million. We remain the only borough in England to offer free adult social care in your home. In Hammersmith and Fulham, people who need care are therefore less likely to find themselves yo-yoing in and out of hospital. They are 96% of people are still at home 91 days after discharge. That's the 5th best result in Britain, and we can do more, and our investment this year will help us do that. In Hammersmith and Fulham, more people needing care now live independently in their own home for longer, with the number of people in residential care in the borough falling by half over the last decade. That's what investment does. That's what putting people does. And those of you in the Labour group know that we are working closely with our good colleagues in the NHS Trust to make sure that we win new investment for Charing Cross Hospital. We're proud that we saved Charing Cross when they tried to demolish it, but we are recognising that simply we have to go further. And that means investing, and that means working closely with our colleagues in the NHS, and that is exactly what we're doing. And we can announce that we've won £50,000 to start on the works already in Imperial's hospitals. So supporting the NHS, caring for people who need care, enabling people to live independently and with dignity, that's a Labour value. That's a Labour value in action. Now, colleagues, ruthless financial efficiency means that this year we will invest more in children's services and young people's services. We are very fortunate to have Councillor Sanderson leading this brief because she makes sure every penny delivers outcomes. That's £25 million invested in our schools. Its children's social care has got an extra £900,000. We pioneered free breakfast some years ago, and now it's national Labour policy. But this year we add an extra £500,000 to make sure that every child not only gets breakfast, but in our poorest schools gets lunch as well. Youth service funding is up by 1.4 million. At a time when it's cut around Britain, we recognise giving young people investment is what every parent has always understood about their own children, and we see all the borough's children as our charges. Now, in November, some of you came to the launch of our Upstream London's Chapter 2 of our industrial strategy. And within that, we launched the Upstream Pathway Bond, building on a principle that every child has a duty, has a right to a route to a better life. We have made sure now that lots of children who even 2 years ago were devoid of direction are now getting mentoring programs for every student. They're getting work experience. They're getting access to high quality new tech study spaces, such as laboratory spaces. They're being offered apprenticeships. They have the chance to win placements overseas in our industrial strategy partners around the world. And they have access to inclusive entry-level training for young people exploring the first stages of their jobs. So far, and I want to pay tribute to these organisations, we have 82 local businesses who have signed up to be part of our Pathway Bond programme. 20 primary schools, 10 secondary schools, and led by Sally Brooke and Eleanor Gunn, we have 2 opportunities commissioners who ensure that this programme will work. Investing in our children and giving them the best possible life, recognising that African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. That's a Labour value. This record investment and these new life-changing initiatives, that's Labour values put into action. Now, my friends, ruthless financial efficiency means 428 million in improving and in building genuinely affordable homes and making sure that our residents have better places to live. We overturned the Conservative plans to sell off every council estate. It's one of the first things we did in office. My friend, Councillor Homan, stopped the immediate sale of every single street property, which was council policy when we arrived in office. And we took a long time to get out the dreadful repairs contracts that were signed in 2013 for a 10-year period. But we're now spending record amounts, and under the leadership of our fantastic Councillor Umay, we are improving the housing service and putting the investment in that should have been there before. We're building 3,000 brand new affordable homes. You can see the sites all around the borough. Many of them passive house quality, which means that they will be environmentally neutral and have some of the lowest energy bills anywhere in London. And added to all of that, we're spending an extra £1.2 million in homeless accommodation, bringing our bill for homeless accommodation to 38 million. Now, God forbid that any of us should ever be homeless, driven out, nowhere to live, the most basic need of security gone from our lives. But if it does, then knowing that you have someone else on your side and ready to step in is the crucial part of British civilization. And this council has taken that seriously with our record investment. Building genuinely affordable homes, investing in council housing, protecting homeless people. These are Labour values. These are Labour values in action. Now, ruthless financial efficiency means we can better support people during the cost of living crisis. I'm not just talking about the third lowest council tax in Britain. Council tax is a regressive tax. But we have one of the most comprehensive council tax support schemes in the country. In fact, there's only 2 other councils in London who have anything come close to ours, both of them Labour authorities. That means 4 out of 10 people are not paying the full amount of council tax in the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham because we care about their well-being. And we find other ways of helping too, from concessionary fares, where we're spending £9 million, which means every person in use of that is getting the equivalent of a £50 bonus to their weekly paycheck. Local support payments for basic household appliances for people who can't buy those basic things. And housing support fund, offering £2.5 million for people who struggle with rents, council tax and energy bills. Imagine needing that support. Well, we can put our hand on your shoulder and say, you've got it. Because these are Labour values. Supporting people struggling to cope financially, that's Labour values in action. Now, all these measures are just some of this Labour administration's actions to support our residents. At just £961 a year for a Band D household, our council tax is not just about low council tax. Because of our ruthless financial efficiency programme, it's also about services you simply would not get if you lived anywhere else in the country. That's called, in simple terms, value for money. And I would expect that we aim to be, if we're not already, the best value for money for council in Britain. Ruthless financial efficiency, that means this year we're going to spend an awful lot of money on one of the biggest, most uncontrollable challenges that we have, and that is climate change. £15 million across the borough on decarbonisation programmes, 63 million on highways and active travel and anti-flood measures. Now, if you've got any constituents who've been flooded out their house, they find, firstly, It's very hard to get that house reinsured. And then eventually we find it's very hard to actually sell the property. Their life comes caving in as that water spews from their toilets and into their basements. It's a terrible blight. Now, it's Thames Water's responsibility to fix flooded sewers, and they have been a disgrace. But we are not going to stand by and watch, and we are doing it with a vast amount of investment. Additional to that, £16 million in public spaces and parks, 1.7 to implement the climate strategy across Britain, and Upstream London, our strategy, that has attracted more green, clean tech investment, not than anywhere else, any other borough around here, but more than Birmingham, Bristol, and Manchester combined. We here in Hammersmith and Fulham have now created an ecosystem where the solutions that will rise up to deal with these challenges will come from here. They are right to say the White City Innovation District tomorrow is made here, and we are making sure that it is made for the benefit of our residents. Now, some people on the right do not agree there is a climate emergency and openly scoff at it, and you can see them all around. We've had some in previous times. I'm not sure if there's any now on the Conservative benches, but there are some. But there are others on the right who say they do agree there's a climate emergency, which is very noble of them. But then they argue against measures to clean our air, reduce flooding, encourage safe active travel, cut pollution, reduce traffic and congestion, or act to make homes carbon neutral. Tackling the climate emergency and safeguarding our biodiversity are therefore Labour values, and this investment is Labour values in action. Now, we've had some challenges. We've had worrying challenges. I have grey hairs that I never thought I would get at my youthful age. But I think we made a mistake in freezing parking when we came into office. We froze it for every time we were in office. It's a real terms cut, and it's been frozen since 2012. And yet, potholes appeared everywhere, and they required filling. There was increasing cost. There was more traffic and different traffic. We acted to make sure there's more electric cars in Britain, but those cars are heavy and still take up the same spaces that non-electric cars do. So we've put that up, and that is tough on the people who will pay that price. And all I can do is to recognise that, but recognise it in the wider context that we have to act on the climate emergency, and we have to limit those most expensive cars. But it's still, our charges are still lower than many elsewhere in London. And our civic campus. 3.5 years ago, when the steel dropped, I was in Shortlands walking back, and I felt the ground shake. That's how heavy the drop was. And that delayed our scheme for 2 years. The health and safety executive were in there for almost a year. You add in the inflation caused by Brexit. We were getting our steel from Ukraine. But Liz Truss, let's not forget her, and by many other factors, and cost began to rise. But this scheme is still better than the scheme we inherited. The scheme we inherited would have cost in real terms over £200,000 with no return to the residents of this borough. And it relied on a model that went up in smoke in 2016, which was to sell flats to overseas investors. That was the model. We have a model to put businesses in, to bring in utilities and restaurants and other ventures, and to have housing that people will live in. And as a consequence, our scheme will break even and then go on to make a profit for future administrations well into the future. But as well as that, it is an amazing scheme. It has startup space for entrepreneurs. It has a concert hall. It has a public sky park, the view of which will be stunning. It will have an art gallery, and we will hire a curator to keep it activated. It will have a 5-screen profit-making cinema. It will have new public square for people to sit in and take the air. It will regenerate Hammersmith and be the start of transforming that part of King Street, along with the IKEA building and other works we're doing around Lyric Square. So it will get there, but it has been tough, as I think everyone in this chamber knows. And Hammersmith Bridge. I must admit, when Sharon came into my office and told me she'd like me to close the bridge, I had half an hour, but she'd prefer it if I could do it immediately. It was a bit of a shock. We've since spent 48 million stopping it collapsing into the river. That was the risk. In fact, now I can bore for England on bloody bridges. It is rotten at every single point. The photographs we've studied, the work that's gone on is absolutely hair-raising to see what could have happened. Now, there are people in this chamber who were previously responsible for Hammersmith Bridge when they were charged with a cabinet brief in Hammersmith and Fulham, but spent less than £100,000 in some decorative repairs that never found the most basic problems. That's the problem with Hammersmith Bridge. And I would say there was a time in politics when something went wrong like that, there was a cross-party consensus that it affected all of us to fix it. Someone once asked me why we didn't clap Greg hands and say nice things about him when he lost his seat. This is one of the reasons. To say that the reason we closed Hammersmith Bridge was because the tri-borough ended was not only wrong, it was deliberately misleading. And to then spend years winding up people and whipping up public vitriol purely because they thought it would deliver political benefit. It didn't. Saw them wiped out of Hammersmith and Fulham and Bonds, and all the MPs lost their seats. But to spend years doing that was nothing short of negligent. Indeed, it was popularist, and it was wrong. I would call on every serious person to get briefed on Hammersmith Bridge and stop talking about it until you are, and then to work with us to make sure that we find a solution. But Hammersmith Bridge remains a challenge. But shaping the future is what we went into politics for. It's what we turn up and we hope to hear about. And I would say our programme is an effective one. Many of you have heard me say time and time again that the world is changing faster than ever before. Tech is being invented now that will have radical consequences on the human condition. How we work, how we live, how we raise funding, what we do. And people are only beginning to just understand it. Science, tech, engineering, maths, medicines, and media are the areas that will reshape things for the positive, but also sometimes for the negative. And it is for us to make sure we lead a progressive change on that. That was the idea that Andrew Jones came up with when he said we need a place-based economic growth strategy linked in to a world-class university. It's the idea we pitched to Imperial when we said rather than just building extended student housing and a small amount of lab space, let's build wraparound startup space and let's turn this into a global campus that begins to rival MIT. And that is what's happened since. So I'll remind you, £6 billion of growth investment, more growth investment than all of West London combined. And you heard the green tech figures, but life sciences is at the heart of what's developing in Hammersmith and Fulham. We are now a global hotspot in life sciences, which is why people continuously look not just to Imperial College London, to Imperial College NHS Trust, who are one of the best research and development hospitals in the country. We have new anchor businesses moving in. We have more startups, spin-out startups, than anywhere else in Britain. And 13,200 jobs in the industries of the future. That's why the pathway bond's important. Taking kids from the White City estate or from a private school, we don't care, we're in favour of all kids, and saying to them, this is the future and there's your pathway to a prosperous part, being a prosperous part of that, is what every government should be of any colour. But I only believe a social democrat could have come up with a plan to make sure that we intervene in the market in this way, because people on the right believe it should be the invisible hand of the market, and people on the left think it should be the state. Only us in the centre would recognise it should be both. And that's the advantage of the upstream pathway bond and our upstream economic strategy. So intervening in the market and finding clever ways to grow the economy and then sharing it out so it's genuinely inclusive, that's a Labour value. And it's a Labour value in action. Now, I want to talk about values a little bit, because I was struck by the recent election campaign. Normally, you know, there's a sort of variety of different messages, and you can see some things in your opponent's leaflets that you agree with and some that you don't agree with. But it said here, Labour, if you don't want another Labour councillor who doesn't share our values. And I noticed they had that on quite a lot of their leaflet. Labour doesn't share our values. And I thought to myself, why are they putting that on a leaflet? What does it mean? And then I began to reflect about their values, these conservative values. You know, let me tell you a conservative value. When I got into office, we came in and we inherited 7 deals that the Conservatives had done, and they'd gone through the planning process. And the planning director said to me, you have to sign them all off. They were terrible deals. And I said, but they're terrible deals. And she said, but you've got no legal choice. It'll be very bad for us if you don't sign them. So I said, go away and tell me what happens to these other businesses if I don't sign them. And she told me. So I said, invite them in for a cup of tea. Anyway, then our first 3 months, we ended up getting 52.25 million by renegotiating 7 Conservative property deals. Now think about that for a moment. That's Conservative values in action. How the hell do you miss out on 52.25 million? That enabled us at the time to invest more in police. It enabled us to build more affordable housing. It enabled us to do a lot of things. And then I began to reflect on these Conservative values that these people on those benches are so proud of. And I thought to myself, I remember when we got into office and we inherited a deal from Capco, which was a dreadful scheme, and Capco themselves told me it was undeliverable. Now, those of you who might remember, we got into office the 22nd of May, 2014. We found a document dated the 23rd of May, 2014, which gave Capco significantly more density. Now, that I thought was sneaky, but it was also dumb because that scheme wasn't deliverable either. Now, they didn't tell anyone they were going to do this. It was just a scheme that we found when we got into office. It wasn't put on their leaflets. We're going to increase the density even more on a scheme that proved to be undeliverable. It was just the way they operated because that was their values. And when you think about those values, you think about the fact they offered every single council estate for sale. I remember being told about meetings by the developer they had to sell off the Clemartley estate. And the person they told me they met with is sitting on those benches still now. And they joked when I said, well, what was their approach? She said, it was very different to yours. They weren't that interested in affordable housing. So every single estate, every single street property sold off. That's a Conservative value. They agreed to demolish Charing Cross Hospital and then spent years pretending they'd saved it and that it wasn't under threat. And then when it was eventually saved because the government capitulated, they said they'd actually saved it all along, something that they couldn't have done because it was never under threat. So that's their approach, ignoring climate change, ignoring the dangerous state of Hammersmith Bridge, tried to privatise our parks, schemed to cut weekly refuse collections, underfunded and never agreed any genuinely affordable housing, underfunded council repairs, and cut funding to children, young people, homeless people, the poorest people. That's Conservative values. So maybe the Conservatives are right. We don't share their values, but it should be no secret to anyone in this chamber, neither do the people of Hammersmith and Fulham. Every time they put it to test, they're rejected. And that's because they're the wrong values. So, tonight, I ask all the councillors in this chamber to consider the challenges that we face as a borough and as a country, and to recognise that the services we put into place and the changes that we'll make in people's lives are crucial. And I ask you to consider that when you consider your votes. I ask all councillors in this chamber to agree to fund the greatest crackdown in crime in this borough's history, and to take every measure as our first duty to keep people safe and to put the money where our collective mouths are. Everyone should recognise that this borough aims to build, this administration aims to build in this budget a stronger, safer, kinder borough. It's a budget that underlines by our deeds what our values are, and it stands by our message to our residents that we are on your side. I wholeheartedly, therefore, endorse this budget. Thank you.
call upon the opposition leader, Councillor Buckabat Farah. And I just want to remind Councillor she has also unlimited time to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, this last year has really been a year of political and economic change, but not in a good way for Great Britain, unfortunately. I'm not known for my use of sporting terminology, but with 3 football teams in the borough, perhaps I can say it really has been a game of 2 halves. And what we've just heard of the council budget for 25-26 tonight is full of guff with very little transparency. Almost a flip-flap or snakebite on residents. But your dummy run comes as no surprise to us, and more on that later. But firstly, I'd like to thank officers for their hard work and professionalism over the last year on behalf of us all. So now to recap from last year. Back in June 2024, the UK's economic statistics were moving in the right direction. There had been a recovery of consumer confidence with inflation under control after the worldwide spike due to COVID and the Russo-Ukrainian war. Interest rates were on the way down. There were 2 national insurance cuts of 2% for the working people, steady wage growth, unemployment rates relatively low, business investment increasing, and pensioners safe in the knowledge of a £200 to £300 winter fuel allowance. We had the fastest growing economy, up 0.7 in Q1 and up 0.6 in Q2, according to the ONS, with us at the top of the G7, leading to a KPMG economist saying that the economy was going gangbusters. This is the positive and clear economic position which Labour inherited. And there can be no doubt about that, as back in 2010, the Conservative government had set up the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, whose role it is to make government figures completely transparent. Even Rachel Reeves said in an interview with the FT, "We've got the OBR now, you don't need to win an election to find that, meaning the figures, out." She also confirmed this during the election campaign, and I quote her again, "I make no apologies for ensuring that our plan is fully costed, fully funded, and deliverable within the inheritance we're going to get." But surprise, surprise, after a Pyrrhic victory or loveless landslide at the election, the same old Labour trick was deployed, the shocking discovery of a black hole, which Rachel Reeves was quick to add to by an extraordinary extra nearly £10 billion for large public sector pay awards. This was a decision, not a surprise. Costs could have been mitigated with pay rises tied to outcomes or productivity gains, but Rachel from accounts failed to do so. However, what may be termed a surprise, albeit more of a rude awakening, was your government's budget on the 30th of October 24. Billed as a budget for growth, it was in fact the biggest tax-raising budget since 1970. 40.1 billion in extra taxes. This immediately had the effect of harming the growing British economy, which is now on the recession watch list, and I will give a few examples. When you govern, you make choices. And as I've said, growth was coming along just fine. Yet she has put in place policies which encourage the opposite. There is a miasma of despair in business where confidence has been shattered by the extraordinary hike of £25 billion in employers' national insurance. And the OBR has said that as a direct result of the budget, long-term investment will be lower than predicted, falling from 3% in 24 to 1.8% in 26. In addition, again from the OBR, 80% of the employer's national insurance hike will be paid for by the ordinary working people in the form of lower wages and higher prices. People's confidence in the government has been shattered, and for good reason, as the tax burden is already at and is forecast to continue to rise to the highest level ever by 28/9. And Rachel Reeves will be coming back for more taxes as her policies fail, despite having promised that she would not need to come back for more. This disproportionately affects the lowest paid, so not a great choice then. Using stealth taxes by not increasing or delaying the personal allowance inflation uplift further will, as the OBR says, result in lower living standards down 1.25% by 29 as a direct result of this budget. And that is only if you've managed to keep your job, as unemployment is also rising, with 4.6% being currently mooted. Interest rates have been cut more slowly than originally forecast, according to David Miles from the OBR. This is because inflation is now up to 3%, a 10-month high, and 1% above the Bank of England's target rate. According to the OBR, inflation is going to be higher throughout this Parliament than predicted in March 24 pre the budget. Just look at the latest spike in 10-year gilts, up at 4.52%. The OBR reckon this will cost the country £10 billion more in higher debt interest, and the government's headway has all but disappeared. Few people dare to spend, and entrepreneurial millionaires whose taxes pay 2/5 of all income tax are leaving our country at the rate of 1 every 25 minutes. Great Britain's growth outlook has recently been slashed for 25, GDP down from 2% to 1.1%, as the economy is struggling with the fallout of the record tax-raising budget. Labour said that they would not increase borrowing, but they are borrowing hundreds of billions of pounds in every year of this Parliament, and yet our borough is particularly badly hit, with no 5-year capital expenditure forecast until the never never for Charing Cross and Hammersmith hospitals, or for Hammersmith Bridge. This Labour government does not rate our Labour council, and there is no support from the 2 Labour MPs in government. Ouch. Talking down the country's economic position has also caused foreign and domestic investors to think twice before planning to invest, and a number of large investments have been cancelled, such as the 450 million AstraZeneca manufacturing plant in Merseyside. The Treasury then shot itself in the foot by cancelling £1.3 billion worth of AI investment when this is one of our leading sectors. As Robert Jenrick said, forget boom and bust. Rachel Reeves will go down in history as the gloom and bust Chancellor. To add to this, Paul Johnson, Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, said that the Chancellor was playing silly games in her spending. So you can't be complacent. Since the general election, Labour have a net loss of 33 council seats nationally, and your vote share here is down between 18.2 and 22.5%, with a swing to us of 13.7%. Perhaps you should all take note that your government's new reiteration of left-wing economics is clearly the wrong approach. Damned by the OBR, economists, the financial markets, employers and employees. I reckon your policies are aptly dubbed securenomics because its creators should obviously be in a secure institution. But now let's move on to the council budget. Your government has not yet changed the local government finance settlement. This was allocated for a single year on the 18th of December 2024. Next year may be tough, as your government is planning on changing the funding basis to one based on poverty deprivation and with the deletion of some smaller grants. Already going is the Household Support Fund and the New Homes Bonus. For 1 year only, there'll be a subsidy of 2.2 million for the shocking employers' national insurance hike. This, however, is only meant to cover the cost of directly employed officers, and so there is nothing for the contractors who provide most of the council services. This is going to be a challenging time for the council as major contractors turn to the council for financial support or sack workers and provide less of a service to us residents. How are you going to solve this conundrum? Meanwhile, for 25-26, the overall core spending power has increased by 11.8 million to a grand total of 232.9 million, or 5.36% up. The council uses a start date of 2010 to attempt to illustrate how clever and prudent they have been in difficult funding times. But the date and the year that's used should, for the sake of transparency, if nothing else, be from when you were elected, which was May 2014, if I need to remind you. Using the correct start date shows that the settlement funding and unring-fenced grants monies over this time period have actually gone up by 2.2%, which is £2.856 million. And all this was financed by a generous Conservative government. I bet those that understand the figures in this chamber are quaking in their boots at the prospect of an inexperienced Labour government in charge of our finances. So, in your last budget report next year, the inaccurate political forward to the budget needs to be changed, and your ruthlessly financially efficient slogan can be left hanging by a thread. Last year, the projected budget gap for 25-26 was 18.7 million, and surprise, surprise, we're looking at a balanced budget this evening after all. So congratulations for doing your job. Unfortunately, 6 Labour and Liberal councils elsewhere in the country have failed to balance their budgets, and your government has given them licence to increase council tax way beyond the 2.99%. The beginning yet again of the slippery slope. This is typical of non-Conservative management, and your administration back in 2003-04 was just as guilty, also under a Labour government, of hiking council tax by a staggering 9.8%. Now, the revenue budget for 25-26 has provision for growth, i.e. spending, of £12.3 million, with savings budgeted at £5.1 million. Now, let's look into the savings more closely first. Who would have guessed that corporate redesign, rather than meaning new furniture and wall hangings for the town hall, actually means a reduction in posts and officer redundancies? This started at the top last year and is moving down the ranks to save a total of £1.7 million. However, it also cost £4.948 million in exit penalties to former officers over the last 3 years to pursue this policy. Then there is the additional external as opposed to internal legal department charges, which includes employment litigation, and this has cost residents £7.4 million over the last 3 years. How can even you believe that you are ruthlessly financially efficient? Last year, I was also shocked to discover that you spent more than twice the local authority average on agency staff. The cost was over £17.5 million, or 13% of annual staffing costs, in comparison to the local authority average of 6%. What flagrant poor management, and this year a similar sum of 16.4 million, or 11%. It just goes on and on. Other sums making up the savings of 5.1 million are relatively small, except for the increase in commercialisation of the borough at 1.5 million, which means more advertisements. Finally, you have the expectation of 5 million in interest this year, the same as last year. Well, let's see about that. Now, it is important that we look clearly at the administration's headline investment proposal. The major spend of £3.4 million is on the law enforcement, gangs and violence against women and girls. This is a new addition to the general fund, but not a new idea. So why all the hype? The service was previously financed from Section 106 and SIL payments levied by the borough on developers. So what's changed? It can't be because you do not have enough SIL and 106 payments. As for 24-25, we have received the phenomenal amount of £39.8 million, including 22 million from one site. SIL and Section 106 payments have been huge for decades. 23-24 being 30.1 million, and 22-23 a total of 17.4 million as recent examples. The conclusion one must draw from your accounting adjustment then is rather sad. You need to rehash a policy because you've run out of ideas and are winding down. But don't worry, soon you won't have to run the council anymore because we will be. The Labour government has increased the grant for homelessness and rough sleeping, a total of 44.4 million. But there seem to be unwelcome ring-fenced areas to this grant, but I do hope you'll be able to make the situation work. At this point, let's just note the extra 1.8 million for waste collection and disposal services, as I will discuss it later. The 2.2 million for children's services will be spoken on by Councillor Alia Afzal Khan, and Councillor Amanda Lloyd-Harris will discuss the 2.8 million for adult social care. The smaller sum of 600,000 that is to be spent will merely keep services going and shows a lack of foresight in the original budgeting. Finally, and surprisingly, given how much we have all heard about it just now at this meeting and the last council meeting in January, it's a bit of a downer for Upstream, as only 250 to 300,000 pounds, depending on where you look in the accounts, is allocated to it for this year, and it's billed as just a one-off. This vision was started by Stephen, now Lord Greenhalgh, and developed with the initial and subsequent investments in land by Imperial. As I said at January Council, I'm delighted that you are continuing our collaboration with Imperial, but I'm concerned that the administration is realistically all talk and no trousers. Now, in order to spend this 12.3 million on already existing spending plans, you have made a choice, and that choice has landed residents with yet another increase in council tax at the permitted rate of 2.99% without having to hold a referendum, which you couldn't hold because you know we'd win. But as last year, it hasn't changed yet. The Local Government Finance Policy Statement 25-26 states, and I quote again, "The council tax referendum provisions are not a cap, nor do they force councils to set taxes at the threshold level." I bet that somehow there'll be a cut next year unless your new government changes the goalposts. You have also decided this year, quite possibly because it's not an election year, to charge us the full ASC precept of 2%. This was not the case in election year 22-3, when you ignored the Conservative government's modelling of a 2% council tax rise and did not apply the 1% ASC precept either. Now, other councils, which in the main are Conservative run, like RBKC, have cut council tax for 25-26, in their case down to a 2% rise, and in addition, they are returning £50 of taxpayers' money to 15,000 residents on low incomes. Now, isn't this a better way to help residents deal with the Labour government's cost of living crisis? Our rise in council tax now has us 4th in London, down from the 3rd previously. Will we be 5th or 6th next year? The Labour government is going to continue the Conservative Household Support Fund of 2.8 million for this year, but has not uprated it for inflation. So half-hearted care then, and really none at all, as the fund is being cut after this year. So from next year, vulnerable pensioners and others in poverty are the target yet again. Cold in a particularly harsh winter and without support. It's disgraceful. At least the council is continuing with our council tax support scheme, as is now acknowledged. And we support this as we've always done, including the addition of foster carers and care leavers to 25. The latter additions are the equivalent of 183 Band D properties in council tax base level terms. The penultimate piece of propaganda on council tax is within the council tax support scheme, which, despite my highlighting it last year, is still being perpetuated, and residents will have heard it or read it in the papers for tonight. It is the implied claim that the council is responsible for reducing single homeowners' council tax by 25%. so perpetuating the myth that 42% last year, dropping to 38% this year, of residents receive generous help from the council when the discount is in the legislation and is not a council choice. It's just so disingenuous to keep saying it when the real figure is far less than 14%. And finally, the collection rate for council tax seemingly remains at 97%. But there is doubt over this figure in my mind, as the current level of 3-year arrears to January 2025 is a significant £37.9 million. This is 45% of the annual council tax income for the whole borough in a year, and is a horrifyingly high figure. It certainly undermines your ruthlessly financially efficient tagline. This debt has been allowed by you to build up because, and I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt here, you were misguidedly so keen to be seen as a compassionate council that you actively chose to leave yourself with no mechanism to collect unpaid monies. So a volte-face, and now we have enforcement debt collectors again. Let's hope they do their job and you've learnt your lesson. But at what cost to the law-abiding resident? Well, in fact, I can tell you that. For every 1% reduction in council tax, it would cost the council to not spend around £850,000. This is a modest sum in comparison to the budget. It's highly likely that we will see this being argued next year as a sensible way forward to help residents with the economic turmoil of a Labour government. Election year always brings forth the goodies, even if they're never implemented, like the 2022 borough-wide parking, but more on that subject later. Residents should be reminded regularly when they receive their council tax bill that nearly a quarter of the tax raised is used in one way or another to fund staff pensions, or to put it another way, the captive funding of local authority taxpayers is poured into generous defined benefit schemes which have long been phased out in the private sector. So to conclude this section, this administration has put up council tax 6 times in 11 years, whilst during our administration, I'm proud to say again that we cut council tax by 3% for 7 years and froze it once. But all is not necessarily lost for residents, but it does depend on how seriously residents take the honesty of current Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, because he said over a dozen times during the campaign last year, and I quote him, "I'm going to freeze council tax, no ifs, no buts. And more excitingly, you can rip up your council tax bill because you'll not pay a penny more than you paid last year." So how will you deal with minus 2.99% or a £2.5 million funding gap? It isn't shown as a risk in the papers. Did you not believe him? Put up your hands now. Okay, I'm going to move on to business rates. Well, locally retained business rates will be 63.3 million plus 6 million for the safety net. This is a very similar figure to last year, but concern is growing that due to your other policies, income may shrink. A deadly combination of your government taxes and the council's increased regulation is making trading extremely hard, and 2 of my long-established independent shops and restaurants in Fulham town are planning to make redundancies or close down altogether. We know you all like Hammersmith better than Fulham, and the comparison of King Street to the North End Road is stark. The latter has lost nearly all its anchor stores under your administration. Boots, Sainsbury's, Whole Foods, Smiths, M&S, Wilko, Lloyds Bank, Halifax, the Post Office, the list goes on. Only Waitrose is still clinging on, but for how much longer? As to the independent shops, you are bombarding them with administration and costs. New tined bin collections, new pavement licences up a staggering 66% to £500, new absurdly sky-high expensive parking charges for their customers, complicated road routes which make out of borough people think twice, before coming to shop in the Wandsworth Bridge Road, where you've just wasted £350,000 putting planters in the bicycle lane. Who knows what your government will do next year? Cut the safety net, perhaps? I think you should be worried, if only at the downturn in your business rate collection. Residents and shopkeepers are very concerned. It is their livelihood, of course, but it also affects the community. The Fulham Road now has 5 empty shops, as I counted them yesterday, and it's a very sad sight. You should be helping businesses, but you're the same as your government, regarding them as cash cows. Moving on, the other part of the council tax bill for residents is the mayoral precept. I can only imagine how cross you are with Sir Sadiq, as he has no restraint button. He should pay attention to former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's famous saying, "The problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money." His precept increase for this year is 4%. This, added to the percentage increases since 2016, equals 74.8% rise for Londoners. What an embarrassing socialist colleague. What on earth is he going to do next year? He's previously not let the fact that it's election year hinder him with his rises. You must be very put out. Councillor Adrian Pascutal-Bore will speak on the GLA budget later. Now, I hope everyone is enjoying this so far. Yes, well, it's a fascinating, rather dark fairy tale which has a myriad of threads, some leading somewhere and some leading to dead ends. So, if I may, I suggest to you all that the most interesting part of the budget report is not the politically hyped forward, but is found lurking in the appendices, and Appendix B is a case in point. The MTFS makes for fascinating reading. It focuses on the general fund revenue budget for the next 3 years, so up to 28-9. Points 5 to 7 are classic, basically saying we have no idea what the new government will do to local government finance, but it possibly doesn't look good, and we'll let you know when we know in a few years' time. We then have a cumulative forecast budget table for 26 to 28-9. This presents us with figures which are, I would argue, cheerful guesswork, landing us with a budget gap of 30 million for 26-7, rising to 43.9 million by 29. Alternatively, 4 paragraphs later, the forecast assumption described as the pessimistic scenario states that the budget gap will probably or possibly be 38.7 million at 28-6-7, topping out at 57.9 million in 28-9. Now, before your jaws hit the ground, there is an optimistic version where the gap is a mere sick 23.2 million in 26-7, falling to 19.1 million in 28-29. All of these are sizable gaps for an authority of our size. Are you just hoping for something to turn up? Regrettably, I think it's clear from this that nothing is clear. Reductio ad absurdum. At this point, it's right to highlight the phenomenal increases in direct charges to residents. The basic uplift for charges is 1.7%, but there are 341 exceptional rises, 30 new charges and 4 reductions. The increasing commercialisation of our borough comes at a cost for residents on top of their council tax, an extra 500,000 this year, with the total from these fees and charges being 78.4 million. Let's look at the cost of bins for businesses. As already mentioned, these now need to be put out at a certain time, saving 50,000 to the council, or will no doubt incur fines, more money to the council, so no pressure on shopkeepers then, with a penalty for perceived fly tipping at £1,000. I'm glad to say, however, that my one-man defence of the 660-litre waste bin at last year's budget has resulted in a more modest increase of 10%, as opposed to last year's hike of 46%. Clearly, someone is listening. However, a new philosophical anomaly has arisen. How heavy is heavy? Discuss. I put this to you now as there is a differential in price for both the 1100 and 1280 litre bins if they are regarded as heavy. So who is the judge, wig or no wig? And how much will we be paying him or her to carry scales and walk beside the dust cart? And where is that in the budget? Counting the street lampposts and making sure we don't pay for ones we don't have could save £150,000. How on earth do we not know what we own already? It makes the mind boggle. And watch out, residents, your friendly LET are going to be out and about watching for any inadvertent mistake or minor misdemeanour with a brand new book of fines scheduled to raise £150,000 a year. This is Angela Busybody Rayner having fun at our expense, authorising new powers for councils to issue fixed penalty notices for a swathe of minor misdemeanours. What will the council's new chosen crimes be? Not knowing the words to the red flag, perhaps. We'll have to wait, quaking in our boots, to see. On a more serious note, the well-being, both physical and mental, of residents is clearly not a matter of interest or concern, as all sports bookings, hire of pitches, which will pull in an extra 150,000, adult learning classes, community room hire and pest control have all been targeted too for above inflationary increases. The one charge with no variation, which I'm pleased to note, is the meals and a chat service, which we all know is about the chat. However, I'm very concerned that you think you should save £64,000 from the home library service. This is not an area which should suffer from your cuts. A bit of compassion would help. Now, the fees which are set by the City of London for us are surprising this year, as they may be seen as an encouragement to start owning not just wild animals, but dangerous wild animals, with a maximum reduction in their licences of up to 17.5%. So watch out in our parks and open spaces. This brings me neatly to our parks and open spaces, and residents and park groups need to be very worried. There are rumours that you plan to cut the size of our parks by 20% and then build on that 20%. This is an appalling thought, and we will fight to stop it. You really don't care about our borough, do you? The next absurd decision is on bulky waste collections. This is a vital service to stop fly tipping, to keep our streets clean. It's wrong that the goalposts of this service have been changed significantly. 10 items to be collected used to cost about £32, but you've now slashed the number of items down to 3 and are charging £49. For each additional item, the cost has gone up to £9.80. That is an 117% increase. So amongst fees and charges, Public Realm wins the award for the most potty decisions. Why does anyone think these are sound ideas? Moving on to recycling and garden waste, the recycling level, although marginally higher than previously, is still low, and the provision of new bins throughout the borough has been extremely costly. Only this week, Fulham Library has run out of clear recycling sacks, so residents will recycle less rather than more. The bins are too tall to clean, so people need bags to avoid the stench of splattered food remains. An anomalous decision was also made to purchase 5 second-hand RCVs which run off diesel. Yes, diesel, the dreaded pollutant, at £860,000, rather than purchase new electric RCVs and depreciate them over 8 years. So clean air costs residents in massively hiked parking charges, but the council can exempt itself. Can you explain that? The savings in waste disposal are budgeted at £300,000, but this is a risk as it may well not cover the new service costs. This is particularly stark with the green waste collection. When this was first announced, the charge was £65 a year, but when it came to roll out, the price had mysteriously risen to £90. So apart from the financial cost, which equates to plus 9.36% on top of your Band D council tax, the other gripe is the manner in which it was sold to residents. It's billed as a new service when we've all been putting garden waste for free in black bags for years. So it's actually a new chargeable service, which partly explains the dismal lack of uptake. The other non-financial reason is that the small print makes the use of the service pointless. I'd better explain to you, when most people in London garden, it's done in bursts of activity, producing 4 to 8 bags worth and then nothing for a few months. So limiting residents to only 2 sackloads a week makes the service futile. The scheme clearly needs to go back to the drawing board quickly. Next, we have a new excitement, which is a new source of income to the general fund, and it is the Conservative idea of companies paying for packaging disposal. It's called the Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging. This is going to provide councils with a new regular source of income, and in our case, the huge sum of £1.87 million this year. There is, of course, sensibly a caveat to this, and next year's funding will depend on how good the council is at waste management. I can't wait to see what the grant figure is for next year. Can you? But first, it's worth mentioning how the council borrows money in the Treasury management papers. It does so through the Public Works Loan Board, which uses gilt rates as the benchmark for interest rates on loans. Now, for some time, this was a cheaper way to borrow than bank interest rates, but the Labour government's economic policies has meant that the 10-year gilt rates had spiked, making the PWLB interest rate 5.2% according to the capital budget papers. So just a thought, when interest rates were low under the Conservative government, perhaps it would have been sensible either to borrow a substantial sum at low fixed rates or set up the process of being able to borrow through alternative methods for times like these. As Alan Lakin said, failing to plan is planning to fail, and I conjecture that this is what you do. Now, as far as building homes in our borough is going, as opposed to last year, these figures are to the end of September 24 from the GLA chart and show it was a slow year for starts of affordable rent properties, with just 15 started and none of any other tenure. Housing association building programmes have also ground to a halt across London, down 92%. Furthermore, this council is in a precarious position, with just over £3 million of right-to-buy one-for-one receipts from 2019 not being spent by the 31st of March 25. So this will cost the council £1.1 million plus interest when it has to pay this money back to MHCLG. This yet again shows incompetence and poor management. The Labour government, in its new, hugely ambitious policy framework, has said that 2,783 net dwellings must be built every year in LBHF, which is an additional 61% more than last year. There is grave doubt from the building industry itself as to whether these numbers are realistic, as there are not enough builders, a lack of materials, etc. The government's help seems to be restricted to potentially 1 new planning officer per borough. We do need more housing, but why set up targets which are bound to fail? It has also been announced that this is the last year for the unring-fenced New Homes Grant too, so goodbye to 2.7 million from the general fund. Now, to our own council homes, the Ombudsman is still dealing with a backlog of damp and mould-related claims, and the cost of fines affects the HRA. The council has raised rents by the maximum allowed, which is 1% over the September inflation figure, so 2.7%, meaning an average annual rise of £189.80. The overinflated service charges regarding water supply and some heating issues means that the service charge will be reduced by about £1 a week. The reserves are now down to 5.4 million, a sum which has halved since 22-3. And Councillor Johnny Alford is going to speak more on the HRA later this evening. And as we'll hear Councillor Amanda Lloyd-Harris on the adult social care budget, suffice to say that over the years you have not claimed the right to add the precept for 6 out of the last 11 years, so not accumulating millions of pounds. So any complaints of lack of funding to our residents doesn't hold fast, and it is you who will have to apologise. Now, let's move on to Hammersmith Bridge. 6 years on, in fact, from when it first became an unusable bridge. Absolutely useless for vehicles crossing the river. 6 miles of the Thames with no bridge. It's now stable, but this has cost the council. There was a meeting a couple of weeks ago of the task force, which had last met in November 21, following an agreement to only call other meetings where there were issues that required unblocking. However, there is now a dispute between TfL and the council because the council failed to get the memorandum of understanding signed, which was the guarantee.
Councillor, stop.
Right.
I'm very sorry about this. I need to take a 5-minute break. I have to change my battery. Councillor Booker, would you like to resume?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to go back to the start of Hammersmith Bridge. An encore, yes. Okay. Let's move on to Hammersmith Bridge. 6 years on, in fact, from when it first became an unusable bridge, absolutely useless for vehicles crossing the river. 6 miles of the Thames with no bridge, and it's now stable, but this has cost the council. There was a meeting a couple of weeks ago of the task force, which had last met in November 21, following an agreement to only call other meetings where there were issues that required unblocking. However, there is now a dispute between TfL and the council because the council failed to get the memorandum of understanding signed, which was the guarantee that the government, TfL and LBHF would split bills in thirds. Because it was never signed, TfL, headed by not so friendly Sir Sadiq, he of the I dissolved the London Bridges Fund in 2016 and spent the money on other pet projects, so there isn't any capital available for bridge repairs, Khan, is refusing to pay up. The sum in dispute is large at about 20.7 million. The original budget was nearly 9. Now there's more slippage of just over 5.5 million, with 3.3 million in 22-23 being paid out of the parking revenue budget. So in total, to get where we are today, £40 million has been paid out. I'm not sure what your latest spin on this is, but either you are arguing that this is value for money or confessing that it's a self-made bureaucratic shambles. Either way, it's a disgrace and an embarrassment to our borough. For residents, this means there is no imminent plan for the full reopening of the bridge to traffic because there are no capital budget figures, and to our concern, it was not mentioned in Reeves's grand capital spend programme either. So we are left in an impasse. If the situation were not so serious and internationally embarrassing, it would be risible. This is an extremely poor reflection on the administration who couldn't organise a bun fight in a bakery. Now, I hope that the rebuild of the Town Hall Civic Campus project doesn't go the same way as the bridge, as many red risks are noted in the audit papers. So therefore, yet again this evening, we are in the pleasant surroundings of the Irish Centre Theatre, and our thanks to the Cultural Centre Board for allowing us to have our council meetings here. The civic redevelopment has been delayed by numerous events, COVID, the steel crisis, and an on-site accident, costing many extra millions of pounds. This means the grand total capital cost of this project is now around £290 million. A bottomless pit of a project being filled with nearly all our borough's SIL and Section 106 millions. Admittedly, there may be an income stream on letting out offices after we've paid 64 million to have them built, although there's a risk that payback will take 45 years. Given how much empty office accommodation there is in Hammersmith already, and the change in working practices nowadays, meaning companies need less space, this is a severe risk. Access to the offices, now that the River Court Cannot road scheme is operating, combined with the dangers to pedestrians when trying to cross traffic-congested King Street, may make it more difficult to let these new offices. Sadly, we must note this evening that we already have the first long-established business forced to vacate the borough because of the River Court traffic scheme. I do hope this is not one of many, but fear it may well be. Now we move on to the greatest recent travesty for residents, the new parking charges. I argue that your anti-car policies are damaging our way of life and have very little to do with air pollution. The latter is merely the excuse. You have cut your other climate change projects and activities to the bare bones, with only a small £120,000 investment this year, hardly rising to the challenge. So clearly, you've decided to hone all your ire on residents with cars. First of all, as is usual with the council consultations, the wording is written to draw the conclusion the council wants. The fact that 34.38% of residents filled in the consultation as against, with 15.45% neutral, ought to show you how strong the opposition to your anti-car policy is, as they had to vote against wanting clean air to get to the right questions. If that percentage votes against you next year, there is no doubt you will not be sitting where you are today. This is the second attempt of the council to put up parking charges. Let's look back to April 22, when during the short campaign, the panicked Labour Party apologised for the recent parking cost increases and said they would not go ahead, and that they had made a mistake, and that they were sorry, and that they would reverse them if they won. Leap forward to now, and the council has doubled down on the mistake and hiked charges for some vehicles up hundreds of pounds. Residence permits, visitors permits, business permits, on-street parking in other zones are all targeted. Your income is expected to more than treble. Electric vehicles charged for the first time, therefore up 125%. This is daylight robbery, and there's already a petition coming to Cabinet from outraged residents. We expect your next apology to come very soon, possibly this evening. Let's see. In your 2022 manifesto, you watered down your promise of free parking for all cars outside rush hour and school collection times to only low-emission vehicles, and yet you haven't fulfilled this election pledge either. So you've hiked prices, left the rules unchanged, and we're left with charges which are now about 60% more than our neighbouring boroughs. The parking budget revenue account isn't included in the budget process as income, and for what reason, please explain that. It pays for highways and whatever else you can get past the monitoring officer, and for some mysterious reason, and I have my suspicions, there are no valid figures for the parking budget 23-24 available for this budget council tonight. We have only been provided with 22-23, where the total income was nearly £50 million. These figures are not really comparable, as COVID affected them and the Conservative government gave the borough just over £10 million. All eyes will be on the 23-24 figures. Point 8, under variances, shows the motivation of the council towards motorists. It says, changes in motorists' habits may lead to the reduction income. Sick. It means reduction of income. Oh dear, the council has let the cat out of the bag. They only want our money, not clean air. So, in summation, to start with the only positive this year, the budget is balanced, however precariously, and we have avoided the fate of Section 114. Nevertheless, the MTFS is majorly concerning. Your ability to make annual savings is small, and reserves, both corporate and service, can only be spent once. You are borrowing at expensive rates and using once-in-a-lifetime reserves at pace, so next year looks intensively challenging. There is genuine danger in putting one's faith in a miracle, and residents cannot sleep easy in their beds with you in administration. You are socialists where Nanny knows best, and your many autocratic policies and decisions are ruining our pleasant borough. Broken promises are not forgotten. You regard residents as cash cows, and they now know it. They no longer have the slightest trust in your sanctimonious value statements, seeing how you laugh at their questions at full council. You can run, but you can't hide the draconian fiscal policies you have voted through over the years. There is minuscule discernible benefit, and most residents just see our borough decaying. You have forgotten the basics and run out of good ideas. We've been left with an ugly, grandiose civic building scheme, a burden to the council taxpayer for the next half-century, and yet no working bridge. Yours is a distorted vision of our borough, which has got out of hand. You've got a Labour government to contend with now, and no one else to blame but yourselves. So tonight, Mayor, it'll be of no shock to you that we will be voting against the budget. But like last year, I'd like to give residents hope that there is a better way to run the council, and we shall do just that for all residents after the May 2026 elections. Thank you.
Thank you. I have received a list of speakers and will take them on an alternate basis, one from the administration, followed one from the opposition. Please note this will be Councillors Painter and Nimmo's maiden speeches. So I'll call on Lydia Painter first to speak, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm delighted to join my colleagues in the Labour Council tonight for my first full council meeting, having been elected just 6 short days ago by the residents of Lily Ward. I would like to thank my predecessor, Ben Coleman, Labour MP for Chelsea and Fulham. I first began campaigning in Lily almost 2 years ago when Ben was selected to contest the parliamentary seat for the Labour Party. Every canvassing session, residents of the ward would tell me how Ben had gone above and beyond for them as their local councillor and as deputy leader of the council. From the resident of Seagrave Road who told me only last week that Ben had helped her get a taxi card so she could still get out and about to her local shops, to the families I spoke to back in 2023 who told me how Ben had supported them during the pandemic. It is clear that Ben is an exceptional role model of what a local councillor can achieve in their ward. Since July, residents have continued to tell me what an excellent MP he is, continuing to stand up for them and helping improve their lives for the better. I would also like to thank Councillor Souslis for being a wonderful organiser and agent, and Councillor Holder for running our committee room last week, and also for giving great advice to me as both a candidate and a new councillor, and welcoming me so warmly to Lily Ward. Speaking of the committee room, I must also thank Councillor Warbay and her mother Anastasia for so kindly allowing us to run Thursday's operation from their home, not to mention the delicious food they provided that kept us going all day. The warm welcome has been continued by all the council staff and officers, in particular Sharon Lee, David Abbott and Jane Sheehan, who have all been generous with their time and patience towards Councillor Nimmo and me this past week. Thank you also to all the staff at the count on Thursday who, just like in July when we had that very long night waiting for a recount of the votes, remained calm and smiley into the small hours. My final but most important thanks, of course, goes to the residents of Lily, who have given me the incredible honour and opportunity to represent them. In the past 2 years, they have given me their time, wisdom and ideas on the doorsteps, and whether they voted for me or not, I look forward to advocating for them in the months and years to come. I would now like to turn to the future and explain why I am so pleased and proud to be voting for the Labour administration's budget at my first ever council meeting. When campaigning in Lily ahead of the by-election, I had the great privilege of knowing that the words on my campaign materials were not empty promises, but testament to what the Labour Council here has been doing since 2014 and will continue to do with this next budget. From keeping council tax to the 3rd lowest in the country, providing free breakfast for school children and free adult social care, to the building of thousands of affordable homes and providing next generation jobs, I am proud to have been able to tell my residents what the council will do for them, for their children and their parents now, and for the next generation who will breathe cleaner air and enjoy greener spaces thanks to this budget. This truly is a budget that will look after the residents of Hammersmith and Fulham so they can fulfil their potential and take every opportunity available to them. One of the elements of the budget that I'm particularly excited about is the digital literacy programme, which will be offered to residents across the borough. As the geopolitical tensions across the world, including right here in Europe, show us, misinformation can lead to dangerous outcomes, whether at the highest level of international politics or at the information we as local councillors put on leaflets here in Hammersmith and Fulham. We must not allow disinformation to weaken our society. I strongly believe that supporting our residents to recognise unbiased information is a key element in maintaining a healthy democracy. Fortunately for me, voters in Lily proved themselves savvy Whether it's plans for hospital refurbishments, deciphering interesting bar charts, or being able to recognise me without a cowboy hat on, Lily residents are showing us all how important it is to take what we see online with a grain of salt. Stetsons and questionable voting statistics aside, I am delighted to support this kind, green and ruthlessly financially efficient budget and look forward to voting for it this evening. Thank you, Mayor.
Congratulations, Lydia, and congratulations on doing it in time as well on your first speech. Well done. I call on Councillor Alford, please.
Mayor, I'm glad to note that the council has managed to balance the HRA account and that it has stated that there is a considerable improvement from last year. That is a great, good thing to have happened. However, as always, I have concerned. And as I understand, it has been possible to maintain the balances of 5.5 million by using the contingency funds which accrued from other sources, such as the money from the repayment from Thames Water. However, by using these funds, it means that there's much less contingency left for another year. This will be all right unless the council is faced with a major problem which it has not foreseen. And as we all agree, we are living in very, very troubled times and things are very unpredictable. As I said, we are all aware of these troubled times, and we're not very sure, particularly with Ukraine, what will happen with the gas and electricity charges, and once again, whether we'll be forced to take an enormous hit. At the moment, they're lower, but it only takes one more war or Mr. Putin to do something we don't want for them to raise, and then we will be in a mess. What has not been mentioned in this budget, and I'm still waiting for, are the figures, is the figures of the compensation which the council is still liable for regarding the mould and the disrepair. Now, I'm told that they're lowering and that they are becoming more manageable, but I have not seen in any budget the allowance we've given for these figures. And I'm waiting for these figures. So I would be grateful if somebody could provide me with them, and then I can make a judgment as to whether they are in control. As I've said, I'm extremely glad the administration has appeared to get control over the HRA, but as I keep on saying and keep on reminding everybody, it must be viewed with caution as the provision for the unexpected. I also note that the council is trying to change the ethos on repairs to make them proactive rather than reactive, as for far too long under this administration, they've not been addressed, which again is why we have these appalling reports. I hope that the council continues on the good path to make sure that we bring down cost of the repairs. And I also note, however, that the cost of implementing the business plan has not been determined. So I would again urge the council to be stringent in assessing the costs and exerting strong control. Sorry, my throat is giving up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Callum Nimmo, please.
Thank you, Mayor. For the
Sorry, Callum,
Oh, sorry.
sorry. I just want to remind people it's his maiden speech.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this opportunity to make my maiden speech during the Budget Council meeting. And may I just pay tribute to Lydia's fantastic maiden speech as well. How could I follow that one? I am honoured that last Thursday, the residents of Hammersmith Broadway elected me to be their councillor. I look forward to working with you, Mayor, to best represent them. The result is testament to your hard work and the hard work of my predecessor, Emma Apthorpe, who I wish to pay tribute to. In 2022, Emma became Hammersmith and Fulham's youngest ever mayor, and she approached her lead membership for women and girls with passion and determination. I wish Emma every success with her new role at the United Nations. I want to also express my gratitude to Sharon Lee for providing over a flawless by-election, Councillor Souslous for all his support and wit, and all the officers involved in running of the election. I also thank all the volunteers who helped campaigning, often in the cold and rain. Many a time did I hear from a curious resident say, "You're quite young to be doing this." They're not wrong. According to the LGA census in 2022, the average age of a councillor is 60 years old. I turned 25 in December. To many, I explained being young gives me energy and enthusiasm to help. I also said that I would learn from the experience of my Labour colleagues and that of the more senior, let the minute show I did not say old, members of the team. And I'm pleased to say that only on a couple of occasions I was then told to jokingly get a life. Mayor, as you recently told me over Jaffa cakes and tea, Hammersmith and Fulham's version of a state dinner, Hammersmith Broadway is the jewel in the crown of the borough, encompassing King Street, the Apollo, the Lyric, Riverside Studios and the Live At Centre. It's as vibrant a ward as they come. As a bit of a foodie, I'm also delighted to represent the amazing Salutation Pub, which is one of the best Thai kitchens, and Crisp, whose viral pizza attracts people from London, from all over London to our borough. I'm told that Councillor Ree is a fan as well. Although the ward is genuinely affluent, it includes areas of real deprivation, and I look forward to contributing to building a kinder and more equal borough for all. On the campaign trail, we repeatedly heard how tough many are finding it. My motivation for standing as a councillor is to serve those who experience hardship. I believe that local government is often the last line of defence for many, particularly vulnerable residents. The decisions we make as councillors, including in this chamber tonight, can make a huge difference on their lives. My values come from my parents, both of whom are from Glasgow, where I myself was born. I lost my accent on the way down to England at age 6, if you weren't able to tell. From the left-wing values instilled by my dad, who is a former Unite shop steward, to the work ethic from my mum, who is an insurance underwriter, I hope to make them proud. To draw my speech to a close, I want to commend this budget, which I'm delighted to be casting my first ever vote in favour of. Residents repeatedly raised concerns about crime on the doorstep, and I'm proud to deliver for them by voting for extra investment. The result in Hammersmith Broadway is a vote of confidence in this Labour administration. Time and time again, we heard how residents value paying the third lowest council tax in Britain, receiving free home care, the thousands of affordable homes being built, and our law enforcement team. This budget, during difficult times, shows this administration is committed to a stronger, safer, kinder borough. I look forward to working with everyone in this new role. Thank you, Mayor.
Callum, well done. And I look forward to having many more state dinners of Jaffa cakes and tea. Can I call now on Councillor Pangu Tupel, please?
Thank you very much, Mayor. First of all, it is a pleasure to welcome Councillors Painter and Nimmo to their place. So on behalf of these benches, Councillor Painter, it was good to see you showing good humour and great energy in the Lily campaign. Councillor Nimmo, you've already secured a rare moment of cross-party agreement, because when you were talking about the eating and hospitality venues of Hammersmith Broadway, I heard our deputy whip say, murmuring to himself, good pizza. Good start. I will do one more very, very brief cross-party moment when I say that as a centrist conservative, I know a good Cameron-era budget when I see one. There are things to welcome in this budget, and those things I welcome. Now, very often I try to categorize the speeches that come from the party opposite, and today has been a special day because we've had all three elements of classical fiction, the elements of history, comedy, and tragedy. History, because there's been this really wonderful focus on 2014, not 2025. Now, the thing to remember is, not that good to look backwards. You are now in power, much as we hate it, across the board. Nationally, locally, in London, you have agency, you can make your own decisions, you can make your own mistakes. You do occasionally make the wrong mistakes. there comes a time when you have to say that stuff that doesn't work out is just the fault of the evil Tories. And, you know, I'm still amused, for example, in the risk register, you talk about the risks posed by the levelling up agenda without nothing about the spending review or anything about the going for growth budget that has so far failed to get any growth. Comedy, because you look at some of the wider economic predictions that this is predicated on, and you see 1.7% growth this year, CPI to fall to 2% in the middle of this year, and interest rates to go to 3% by the end of the year. And, you know, that makes me laugh, albeit a little bit hollowly. And I did chortle also at the fact that you're going to be, as part of the digital inclusion drive, spending 4 billion on new IT for the council, forgetting that digital inclusion is more about our residents. But the tragedy bit, and pains me to say this, but where good work is done by the administration locally, it is being undone by Labour at a city and a national level. Now, one of the biggest areas where there is no ruthless financial efficiency is over at City Hall, and that represents a very, very good third of what our residents pay, or as our dear leader put it, how heavy is too heavy, discuss. And that means that, you know, it's about joined up thinking that delivers proper economic value. Those of us on the planning committee saw a really good public realm proposal for Olympia, let down by the fact that TfL wouldn't be able to put step-free access into that station. Now, with a London Prime Minister, Mayor, and a majority across the councils, you'd think there'd be a lot more coherent working. Decisions are all interlinked, national, local, at London level. But instead, you have this combination of back scratching and back slapping and back covering that really doesn't work. The economy suffers, the people suffer. Now, a little bit about the GLA. Sadiq Khan had a good year. He won a knighthood. He lost Amy LeMay. And much as Amy amused us, she was quite good value, only a cumulative loss of 1.1 million. And I think like a true czar, she presided over the destruction of things that she was meant to defend. But we've had bigger issues as well. You had 2 million on statue branding, 6 million on tube rebranding, 24 million squandered off TfL Friday fare discounts, which their own experts said would prove ineffective. They did. A 4-day week, so tube drivers wouldn't go on strike. They went on strike. 147.5 million for universal free school meals across all the capital state schools. That's, in practice, a really lovely idea. But this is free money to some of the richest families in the UK. The full staffing of no fewer than 9 deputy mayors in their offices. We must be very jealous there. And a great year of performance too. Shoplifting, up 50% on the year, from 242,000 to 330,000 crimes over 2 years. And for robberies, 28,000 to 35,000. A historical high we have of 105.8 crimes per 1,000 people last year. And at the same time, we face a cut of 400 officers across London. Now, on housing, despite 4 billion being given under the Conservatives to build more affordable homes, which we are fully supportive because we want them, only 3,026 homes started, which is an even worse proportion of affordable home starts than we have in Hammersmith and Fulham. And, you know, I deal with ward issues with this all the time. There are still empty properties ready to move into. What have Labour done to ensure they get good value from the mayor? Absolutely nothing. I'll finish there, but we have a London that is less safe.
Councillor, time up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Longley, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start by thanking everybody who was involved in the process of putting this budget together. To have set another balanced budget in the current circumstances is an achievement in and of itself, but to have done so whilst generating £12.3 million of additional investment is frankly a minor miracle and testament to how cabinet members and officers have embodied our value of ruthless financial efficiency. In particular, I'd like to thank Sukhvinder Kelsey, James Newman and Andre Mark and the whole of the finance team who've done such a great job in making sure that all of the numbers add up. I'd also like to congratulate Councillors Painter and Nimmo on their fantastic maiden speeches this evening. After just 6 days as elected councillors, they're already making a fantastic contribution to running the borough. And I'm delighted to hear that at just 35, I'm well below the average age for a councillor in this country. Now, Councillor Bottlebank Fowler spoke for 50 minutes this evening. I think my job is to try and rebut at least some of what she said. I've only got the 5 minutes to do so. I'll try and respond to some elements of the speech and the mercifully shorter speeches from other members of the opposition later on. I hope the leader of the opposition doesn't have a monopoly when it comes to sporting metaphors. I know that she's concerned about our election results, but judging by the results in the recent by-election, where they came third in Hammersmith, I would say that it's the opposition who look like they're facing relegation this year. I also see that we're now allowed to talk about national economic decisions again, something that was clearly the opposition didn't like when they were in charge. And Councillor Bottlebank-Fowler spent 8.5 minutes talking about that, talking about the wonderful economy that we inherited. I'll just remind her, because she seems to have a short memory, that this time last year, the opposition were describing the technical recession that we found ourselves in. Now, I'm an economist. I've never come across the term technical recession. I mean, it sounds to me like it's just a recession. Of course, you can grow quickly from such a poor start, but I don't think that's any sort of record to be crowing about. Now, she mentions her concerns about the impact on employers' national insurance contributions and how this will affect suppliers. Interesting, I don't remember her mentioning the huge increase in corporation tax back in April 2023. That increased from 19% to 25%. I didn't hear her concerns that we weren't going to be able to get contractors to provide the services that we rely on. And the reason that we didn't have any issues with this is because, as a council, we are good at negotiating with our suppliers. We are ruthlessly financially efficient, as has been said, and we do not see it as our job to guarantee a profit for the private sector, unlike the Soviet views of the opposition over there. I also want to correct a figure that she mentioned but clearly doesn't understand, and that's if we take the decrease in central government funding from 2014. Now, she says those who understand these figures will know that there's a 2% increase. Actually, those who understand how inflation works will know that there's a 33.4% real terms decrease. I don't know if she remembers the 11% inflation we had just a couple of years ago, brought about by the choices of her government, but this had a big effect on the council, £15 million, as we heard from the leader. She mentions the use of agency staff, spending on agency staff. What is her problem with us temporarily hiring specialist people to carry out specialist tasks? Would she rather we had a huge staff full of people who were able to do all these things that we just called upon as and when we needed them, but who sat there doing nothing for the rest of the time? That doesn't sound particularly efficient, and it's probably a good idea of the sort of borough that they would run were they in charge. Now, one thing I really do want to come back on is this idea that moving the LET funding from Section 106 into the general fund is just an accounting fiddle. We have moved LET funding into the general fund to safeguard this service. Who knows, at some point in the future, I mean, looking at current trends, it doesn't look likely at the moment, at some point in the future, the opposition could be running this borough. We have already seen their inability to generate sufficient Section 106 money to be able to continue paying for it. And we have seen the complete disregard with which they hold the LET team in. In just January last year, they put forward a motion to this council calling for us to defund the law enforcement teams. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. We are certain on this side of the House that we are supportive of measures to cut crime, and they should be too.
Lloyd Harris, would you like to speak?
Thank you very much. Mayor, we have come to the time of the year when residents judge the administration if their services are value for money. As usual, the verdict is that Labor politicians who have delivered higher taxes, broken promises and frustration for the people of Hammersmith and Fulham. The adult social care budget has been increased by about 6.4 million, yet more efficiency savings had to be found. The council has increased council tax for yet another year by 2.99% and had to apply the government's precept of 2%. Whilst this is available to all boroughs, it is an additional tax on all council taxpayers when they can least afford it. This borough, as has been mentioned, has one of a small base of residents paying full council tax to pay for these services. Whilst we are not in dire financial straits as some boroughs, we are spending an inordinate amount of money on the Town Hall vanity project. Could this money be better spent providing the care that our residents require to live independent lives? I think we all know the answer to that. The Labor government has not been able to find any additional funds for health and adult social care that are going to make any sort of impact on our community. The Secretary of State was not even able to set up a single meeting to bring the major political parties together. If an email invitation is beyond the government, heaven help any of those who need actual services. The loss of the winter fuel allowance of £300 per head had been a disaster for our elderly in the community. Some have been making choices of food or heat. No vulnerable person should be put in that position. I was in contact with the department about what measures were being put in place for those who had lost their winter fuel allowance. I was told that warm hubs would be made available to help reduce the impact in our community. Whilst it was not ideal, I accept that some effort was made. What surprised me is that there were so few, especially in Fulham. Given the Labor government's dire news presented to the public on the 9th of September 24, how was no action taken locally to advertise help until the 10th of January 25? What were they waiting for? A heat wave? The answer was far more depressing. I was told that there were insufficient funds to advertise the warm hubs sooner. We might call Labor's funding for hospitals deal or no deal. However, the recent so-called new hospital deal has done nothing to allay residents' fears that Charing Cross Hospital or St Mary's will be refurbished before 2035 at the earliest. Where's our Labor MP? Where's the council? What are they doing about lobbying the government? They are all missing in action. I hear and see nothing that would suggest they are actively pressing the government for more funds to upgrade our two most important teaching hospitals. Choices must be made. Austerity was a global issue that started after the Labor government had mismanaged the entire banking industry, but it is clearly an ongoing problem that is affecting our ability to provide services. The Labor government has not helped in overtaxing the economy while stifling investment and failing to raise the money to pay for new promise it has kept, which was to cave into pay demands of a few public sector unions. But let me be, I'm happy to praise services where it's due. So I would like to actually say the CQC's rating of the reablement service and River Court respite was excellent. That's very good news. Improved response times for people requiring assessment and an increase in the number of assessments. And unfortunately, the launch of a suicide prevention campaign, which is required. The main challenges are obvious to all sitting in this room. Funding, pressures of the care market, hospital discharge pressures. Given the many constraints in this area, we need to be looking at more creative solutions. The NHS is looking at further partnerships within the private sector. If we are to provide improved facilities and better care in the community, then AI will become more the norm across all services. This may affect staff numbers, but may allow for better pay and conditions to those providing more complex services. I would love to finish on a positive note, but all I've seen are broken promises, higher taxes and wholesale abdication of responsibility for the people of Hammersmith and Fulham. What I would like to say is for the Labor Council to stand up to residents against the Labor government. When are we going to hear the mantra, borough before party? I would urge you all to vote against this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the leader to sum up, please.
Thank you very much. And I would start by contrasting the fantastic speeches of our two new councillors, which were well prepared, detailed, and understood what they were talking about, with what we've just heard from the opposition councillors over here. I was sitting there thinking to me, what's the metaphor? I mean, at least they've read the papers this year, I thought to myself, but they clearly have not understood them. They've mixed up revenue accounts and capital accounts, mixed up the HRA and the main council budget. They've misunderstood basic things like inflation and cost, council tax lower now in real terms than it was in 2014, and yet our spending given to us much, much lower than it was in 2014. Anyone should be able to work that out with a GCSE in mathematics, but not this lot. Like, they've read the back of the jigsaw box, they've tipped all the pieces out, but they've put them together in not quite the right order. So this is what we're up against. And I think people deserve better. Let's just shoot some of the foxes that they're running. Hammersmith Bridge, okay? I don't know how the former cabinet member for Hammersmith Bridge talk about it with any sense of authority, especially when it closed and all they did was play tomfoolery for party political games. On the 19th of June, 2023, the government asked the government to sign a papers, and we're told they would, to give us a third by third agreement. They did not. On the 20th of November, 2023, the government ministers told us they would sign the papers for Hammersmith Bridge. They did not. On the 8th of January, 2024, they told us they would sign the papers for Hammersmith Bridge. They did not. Encouraged by Greg Hands and encouraged by this lot to keep causing trouble. The problems with Hammersmith Bridge lay at that door. £278 million to fix this road. Will get carping from the person who was directly responsible and who could have had the catastrophe happen on her watch because she simply did not check. And what else do we see? Rumours, they say, that we're selling off parks to build houses. That's them. That's literally what their plan was. That's literally what they were going to do. What did we do? We stopped the sale of the corner. We built the Sands End Arts and Community Centre, one of the great triumphs of the Labour administration. Don't confuse us with yourselves when you look in the mirror. That's your policy, not ours. We are not selling up parks. You have a duty to tell the truth. And then we look at the upstream. Now, I'm very fond of Stephen Greenhalgh, and I really do respect him. And he is quite right, the person who bent over backwards to encourage Imperial in when John Anderson and Imperial wanted to buy. But I feel bad he's not here. But they bent over backwards with everybody, with Capco, with Stanhope. They paid for Stanhope's paving outside the BBC Centre out of public money. They bent over backwards for everybody. They never had an industrial strategy plan, and they never talked about it, and it's not theirs. It's not, you know, and that's the fact of it. This is the problem. And then we look at crime. We know where they stand. They wanted to cut the Let scheme, and we've heard their soft on crime rhetoric now for 2-3 years. They cannot be trusted with the safety of all our citizens, the children, the women, the men coming home, frightened of something might be happening to them. And these guys want to slash spending on crime and are voting against the biggest crime fighting budget in this borough's history. Do you know what? There are two Conservative parties now. Let's not be mistaken by Reform, who came second in Hammersmith Broadway. They're just Conservatives in different clothing. The same nonsense, the same popularism, the same twisted view of cut low taxes, the private sector will save everything, and Britain can be great again without any public money. These Conservatives say they're proud of our borough, but they didn't like all the people who lived here, which is why they tried to sell off their houses and close down the hospital. Never an apology. Never once have they had an apology. And until that time, you will be punished at every single election and keep being punished because you're simply not ready to form a government. Thank you.
We now move to the vote. As this is a vote on the budget, it's quite required that a roll call vote be taken. As we don't have a division bell, Grant, can you please commence the roll call?
Will councillors please indicate how they wish to vote on the recommendation? Councillor Alexander. Councillor Antonides. Councillor Brown. Councillor Campbell-Simon.
4.
Councillor Schafop-Verdier.
4.
Councillor Collins.
4.
Councillor Cowan.
4.
Councillor Daly, Councillor Harcourt, Councillor Harvey,
4,
Councillor Holder, Councillor Homan,
4,
Councillor James,
4,
Councillor Lang,
4.
Councillor Melton,
4.
Councillor Miri,
4.
Councillor Nemo,
4.
Councillor Nawabe, Councillor Penta,
4,
Councillor Patel,
4.
Councillor Perez,
4,
Councillor Kwan,
4.
Councillor Quigley, Councillor Reid,
4.
Councillor Richardson, Councillor Rowbottom,
4,
Councillor Sanderson,
4,
Councillor Schmidt, Councillor Sadiq,
4.
Councillor Suslus,
4.
Councillor Ume Francis,
4,
Councillor Ume,
4,
Councillor Vaughan,
4.
Councillor Walsh, Fonso,
Against.
Councillor Afzal Khan,
against,
Councillor Orford, Councillor Burland,
Against.
Councillor Brockman Fowler,
Against.
Councillor Dinsmore,
Against.
Councillor Lloyd Harris,
against,
Councillor Pascal Toubert, Councillor Stanton,
Against.
And here are the results. 432 against 9, not voting 1. The recommendations are carried. Item 6.4, 4-year capital programme 2025-29 and capital strategy 25 to 2026. I call on the Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform, Councillor Rowan Ree, to move the report and its recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor. Formally moved.
I call on Councillors Francis Ume, Florian, Councillor Holman, Adam Peter Lang to speak on the administration. Sorry, I think I got that wrong. Francis Ume, please.
Thank you, Mayor. As a society, we are responsible for making sure that shelter, one of life's most basic needs, is accessible to all. Just as a well-built house protects us from the elements, a society that prioritizes housing shields its people from poverty, instability, and hardship. This administration believes that everyone deserves to live in a home that is safe, decent, and secure. That's why our capital strategy is our blueprint to creating a future that is prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable for all. Over 12 years, we have dedicated more than £500 million to improve existing homes and build new ones, with just over £400 million committed over the next 4 years. We will transform lives, strengthen communities, and create a fairer future for all. So how will we achieve this? It begins with our current homes, providing housing where people feel safe, secure, and proud to live. Safety remains our top priority. We're taking decisive action by upgrading 4,000 fire doors, free of charge for our leaseholders, installing unique evacuation systems in high-risk buildings, and fitting sprinklers in more than 600 homes. We're also carrying out essential safety checks across our homes. And to reinforce our commitments, we've commissioned an independent external audit, confirming the leadership and strong focus on resident safety. Our compliance systems are robust, with over 97% compliance in key areas such as water, fire, lifts, and electrical safety in the past month alone. We're also proactive in maintaining and improving our housing stock. Our borough-wide condition survey has helped us identify areas of greatest need, allowing us to plan and deliver essential upgrades, from new windows and kitchens to modernised bathrooms and estate improvements. Sustainability is also fundamental. We've committed more than £100 million to decarbonisation measures to meet our energy-efficient ambitions. It should also be noted that we are repairing homes with in-house teams and contractors focused on getting repairs right with a compassionate and listening approach, effective contract management, and contracts that are not underfunded as they were under the Conservative administration. I might also add that it's quite despicable that there are firms out there that seek to make claims for repair cases on behalf of residents that actually do not benefit residents, instead drive up their own profit margins and impact the housing revenue account with excessive fees. Despite this, we have sufficient reserves in place, which are not drawn from water contingency. With thousands of households waiting for a home and some living in overcrowded conditions across London, it's essential that we, like other local authorities and providers, build more homes. Tonight, we've heard from the opposition that when you govern, you make choices. When in power, the Conservative administration chose to demolish council homes, chose to underfund contracts, and chose to look away from those in need. We choose to build, we choose to invest, and we choose to care. We recognise the value of council homes, and we're ensuring that more than 3,000 new energy-efficient affordable homes are built or underway by 2026. And these major developments are not just about providing high-quality housing, they're about creating vibrant communities with sustainable design spaces that bring people together. For example, Ed City in the north of the borough brings 100% affordable homes and a hub for opportunity with schooling and youth zone facilities. It was fantastic to see the work underway at a recent site visit to Hartop and Lannoy, and this development will also see affordable homes built to highest energy efficiency standards. There will be renewable energy solutions like solar panels and communal air source heat pumps, and the development will also build a new play area and communal outdoor spaces. Farm Lane, Lily Road, Watermeadow Court, more examples of the different developments we have that are underway. Developments that will also bring jobs and training opportunities to the borough. We're doing all of this while being smart, responsible stewards of our finances, spending £400 million wisely and carefully. Let's not forget that the then Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, his department handed back £0.9 billion worth of funding to the Treasury in July 2023. Money meant to fund new housing and to improve building safety. We are doing things differently here. Every pound spent with purpose to deliver more homes, enhance services, and change lives. At its core, this strategy is an investment in inclusion and fairness, keeping us on track to building a safer, stronger, and kinder borough. This administration, alongside dedicated officers, will continue working hand in hand with residents to build a housing offer that makes everyone proud.
Time's up, Councillor. Thank
Day
you.
by day, brick by
Time
brick,
is up.
home by home.
Time is up.
Thank you.
Councillor Florian would like to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, first, can I congratulate our councillors Painter and Nimmo on their victories? You ran exceptional campaigns, you kept your head high, and you stayed out of the gutter, even in the face of the vile disinformation that was thrown at you. We, the Kensingtonians of the West, your friendly neighbours to the east and the north, are very proud that residents in you as their champion. And we look forward to working with you to foster an ever more union between Hammersmith and Fulham. During the by-elections, I had the opportunity to meet some of the Ukrainian refugees in our borough who expressed their fear that we may be heading towards what Ferdinand Foch quoted as not a peace, but an armistice for 20 years. This highlights the importance of strong and forward-thinking leadership, which is why I'm glad that defence features so prominently in our groundbreaking Upstream London strategy, and that the capital strategy and four-year capital programme retain the White City Innovation District as one of their key strategic priorities. On this, the 80th anniversary year of the armistice in Europe, The recently opened Defence Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, or DIANA, which is twinned with the similar accelerator in Tallinn, has been selected for NATO's 2025 programme. This programme will create more jobs for local people and will be delivered from a new state-of-the-art office in the Innovation District. It will focus on developing the cutting-edge technologies that will provide an advantage on our adversaries of the future. While national defence may not traditionally fall under the remit of a London borough, we can certainly take pride in the fact that global innovation is rooted here, in Hammersmith and Fulham. We should also be reassured that our borough, which has done so much to organise the liberation of Europe, will continue to play an integral role in the rearmament of Europe and in securing its future. Just as we take security seriously on the global stage, we're keeping communities safe. While the opposition continues with its proposals, this Labour administration remains laser focused on security and well-being. The capital programme, we are £1 billion to replace and improve what is already a comprehensive CCTV network in the country. And as it's been said, not our data, policy's data shows our approach is working, with major reductions in violent crime, robberies, and residential burglaries. But true security isn't just about policing, it starts with opportunity. This is why the Excellent Schools Renewal Programme prioritises investment in new, modern and fit-for-purpose schools across the borough. This is crucial to ensure that children in Hammersmith and Fulham are educated in environments that enable them to thrive. While the Conservatives left national school funding at below 2010 levels, our £118 million EdCity Education Campus investment will directly link education with the opportunities in the White City Innovation District, such as NATO, to prepare young people for the careers of tomorrow. This investment goes hand with our strategy to create more affordable housing and tackle the national housing shortage we inherited. Councillor Uma has mentioned the Building Homes and Community Strategy Programme, and I remain thankful for the significant support provided by this programme to residents across the West Cairn and Gippsland Green estates in the form of £40 million capital investment, carbonising the estates and truly revolutionising their lives. This capital programme isn't about quick fixes, but one of lasting change. It is about creating a community where everyone feels safe, where our children are given the best possible start, and where every resident has a stake in our shared prosperity. As a Labour administration, we will continue to shape a future where Hammersmith and Fulham remain of opportunity, fairness and resilience for all. In an uncertain and often challenging world, our strength lies in unity. If we stand together, support one another, and keep moving forward, then there is nothing we cannot achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Councillor Holman to speak, please.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to congratulate my colleague, the Nimo, and the painter, who will be excellent. Congratulations, very good. King in support of the capital programme, as it has indeed happened sometimes in the past. For this, very much comment. But actually, a spend of 5.32.3 for the next 4 years and 213.6 million should not just be without debate, especially as it covers a programme that aligns very much with the administration's vision for the borough and the commitments that we not just for improving and investing in our infrastructure, but also for the future. We've already heard from Councillor Ume about investment in our housing, and I'm very pleased that some of that is going into Conningham Ward, into Beckley Gardens and the Grange, so thank you for that investment. And not only investment in new affordable homes, but also to ensure that our homes are up to the right safety standard. We've heard a lot about that, so I'm just going to focus on other issues throughout the facility network. Has more CCTV cameras per person council in the country. And as ward councillors, I think all of us are very aware of the ever-present requests from our residents for more. In addition to this, the consequence of being ahead of the game with our extensive coverage has been that some of our infrastructure needs updating. So I welcome this 4.5 million programme to improve our infrastructure. And it goes together with our overall strategy of making this community safe. If you take the law enforcement officers, the gangs unit, our public spaces protection order, all things that we are determined to do to keep our residents safe. Secondly, I'd like to draw your attention to some of the funding that's been allocated to this capital programme to improve our public realm. Continually, the rolling out of energy efficiency lighting, replacing lamp columns, investing in more cycle lanes and storage, things that people want, investing in SUD schemes, improving our parks. We've heard from the opposition tonight about selling off our parks. Quite the opposite. Parks for the future strategy and £485,000 investment in our parks this year. Don't take any lessons from them. It's all Tory rumour. Investment projects aligned to this Labour administration's vision for Hammersmith and Fulham. Thirdly, I think it would be remiss of us not to mention the commitment to our schools renewal programme 2023 to 2028. We've already delivered a lot from the previous 3 years, but this programme will provide modern, fit-for-purpose schools, help improve provision for learners with special educational needs and disabilities, or alternative provision, and reduce carbon emissions from our buildings. Finally, I want to say how much I'm looking forward to the new civic campus. We've heard a lot about this evening from the leader. We've heard a lot of criticism from the opposition. But this is a commitment that this council's given for many years to deliver a state-of-the-art building, which is not only home to council services, but also provides a vision for the future for Hammersmith and regenerates the West End of King Street. There's much more in this programme I could highlight. I just picked a few highlights to demonstrate just some of the things that we do that shouldn't be just taken for granted. A capital programme that supports and delivers this Labour's administration vision for Hammersmith and Fulham. I recommend this capital budget and ask everyone to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Lang to speak, please.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And can I also give a warm welcome from Brook Green to our 2 new Labour councillors, who I know are already making an important difference to the lives of their residents and contributing to continuing success of Hammersmith and Fulham's Labour Council. And they've made excellent maiden speeches. This council's many successes are best perhaps shown with this year's budget and our ambitious 4-year capital programme and capital strategy 2025-26, investing a staggering £532.3 million over the next 4 financial years. And can I pay tribute to Councillor Rowan Ree and council team and officers for their tremendous work and vision in these challenging times. We can all vividly remember the catastrophic effect of the Truss economics budget, and we're all living with its consequences. And I read recently that the country's 20 most indebted councils owe more than £30 billion. £30 billion. And Councillor Francis Umer has excellently spoken about our housing plans and new developments and initiatives. So, Mayor, if I may, I'd just like to highlight briefly a few other aspects of the capital strategy which clearly dovetail into our Labour Council values, including being ruthlessly efficient, building shared prosperity, doing things with local residents and taking pride in Hammersmith and Fulham. So let me mention the £4.5 million CCTV replacement and investment, being tough on crime and enhancing resident safety. Our energy efficient lighting and decarbonisation schemes, helping us to be more carbon neutral, but also providing safer streets and spaces for all. Our investment in the public realm, including column replacements, footways and carriageways. Our schools renewal programme, the delivery of its first phase, 21-24. Now our ambitious plans moving forward are underway, including our commitment to young people, their families and school staff with school maintenance, and our commitment to family hubs, and utilising and spending the benefits of the £118 million investment in Ed City for All. Mayor, I recently visited, as part of that, the West Youth Zone. Wow. Talk about taking pride in Hammersmith and Fulham. What facilities, what engagement and participation by young people, their families and the community, and what impressive and committed staff. I saw climbing walls, superb cooking kitchen facilities, boxing, and a state-of-the-art recording studios. Mayor, speaking of age, and after last council meeting, some of you may think my record collection finishes at the turn of the last century. Not a bit. One of my favourites is Collapsed in Sunbeams, 2021, from our very own Hammersmith and Fulham educated Mercury Prize winner, Arlo Parks. And Mayor, as I left the last full council meeting to support a local hostelry in our important nighttime economy, I literally bumped into 3 young men with guitars slung over their shoulders, a case of where culture connects. They told me they'd just been rehearsing in Shepherd's Bush before an upcoming gig. One was from the northeast, and he'd come down to live here. One was from Paris, and the lead singer was local. They're called Gingerella. So the next day, I searched online to find them. They're a new group, all jangly guitar and obscure lyrics, but good and with bags of potential. Young people at the beginning of their careers with their hopes and dreams in Hammersmith and Fulham. So this Labour Council then, with its capital strategy, provides the foundations, the infrastructure and the opportunity for all. And through this strategy, we can all continue to take pride in Hammersmith and Fulham, creating a stronger, safer and kinder borough. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Councillor South Town. Please.
Mayor, I rise today to challenge the Council's capital budget strategy for children and education services. I don't do this lightly or flippantly. Investment in education is not just welcome, but vital. And as a maths and computer science teacher, I see every day the impact community programs and local development can have on our youth. But as I read through all the documentation detailing this budget, a common theme regrettably emerged. This budget contains an abundance of projects that are compellingly worded and undoubtedly well-intentioned, but lacking a tether to practical reality. First, any good budget must be clear and precise, and unfortunately, this budget's commitments are nebulous and unsustainable. We cannot allocate large lump sums to broadly titled initiatives like the school maintenance programme and the special school organisation plan without specifics, without clear figures and desired outcomes for each of the specific projects within these tenets. This problem is worse for the promised investment in borough special education needs and disabilities provision, with the report failing to specify the details of how funding will be distributed in this vital area. I work with SEND students every day, and I know how much value even a small amount of funding can make, which is why when vague sums are allocated in bulk with little clarity, I am deeply, deeply concerned that we will not get the deserved value for money. Local families will continue to struggle to find places for their special needs children, forced to attend costly out-of-borough placements. We need faster, clearer, more ambitious, and more direct investment in SEND support services.
Secondly, this budget seems at risk of continuing, if not amplifying, the delays that plague this borough's key school redevelopment projects. The Avonmore School wishes nothing more than to quickly refurbish and revitalise their site. But the council has decided to build an entire housing project on top of this school. This forces all schools' pupils to decant to Mond Street, causing disruption for commutes and chaos for parents who are genuinely inflamed. Though this was approved in November, construction will not even begin until mid-2025, and a lack of specificity in available reports suggests that this project will inevitably face delays and setbacks. This issue is not isolated, but systemic. The school's renewal programme has been conjoined at the hip to housing initiatives. This is an unacceptable gamble. Our children's education should not be tied to the unpredictable pace of property development. Education funding should be ring-fenced and protected, not tied to real estate deals. Thirdly, I'd like to discuss family hubs. In principle, I adore this idea and have been there and have seen their value firsthand. That is precisely why this council needs to be so much more strategic. There is too much at stake to allow the same value pledges, the same vague pledges, followed by a lack of long-term strategic funding, exact analysis, and clear assessment to let our children down over time. In the budget risk document, it is stated that there will be monitoring and risk assessments. But for such a significant project, far more detail is merited. We in this council are judged not on what we say, but what we deliver. And when this administration fails to realistically consider how much these projects will actually cost to deliver, not what we wish them to, when you conjure solutions from on high instead of seeing the world through the eyes of the public, when you construct projects without considering their economic sustainability and feasibility, and when you fail to build in systems to monitor, ensure accountability, and stick to deadlines, you let our constituents down. And for that purpose, I have no choice but to oppose this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Is the report and its recommendations agreed? Yeah. No. Now we need a vote.
Who's in favour?
Oh, those in favour, please. Those against? Those against? Not voting. 432 against 9. The recommendations are carried. Item 6.5, Treasury Management Strategy Statement 2025-26. A call on the Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform, Councillor Rowan, to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
Are there any speakers? Councillor Ree.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, this isn't quite as contemporary a reference as Arlo Parks, but in Hamlet, Shakespeare wrote, "Neither a lender nor a borrower be." I think it's fair to say that Polonius would have written a very poor council treasury management strategy statement. He was, however, right to say that brevity is the soul of wit, so I will keep this very short. This report sets out how the council ensures that it has the money it needs to spend when it needs to spend it, and that money is set aside for a rainy day and works as hard for the borough as the residents who it serves. Now, I wanted to speak on this just to pick up on the interesting, if illegal, suggestion from the Leader of the Opposition Why, she says, why don't we just borrow loads of money when rates were very low? Sadly, I think the government's thought of this clever ploy, and there's a ban on what's called borrowing ahead of need. So that's, I'm afraid, not something we're able to do unless we want to end up in Wormwood Scrubs. But it's an important point because we're a council, we're not a hedge fund. It's not for us to take this money that we're borrowing and commit it, gamble it recklessly, as their Tory colleagues in Woking have done, finding themselves in £2.1 billion of debt. Now, it has been a relatively rocky period for money markets over the last few years, with inflation hitting 11% after the mini budget and interest rates increasing to 5.25%. Now, the Leader of the Opposition again says that we've undertaken expensive borrowing over this period. Well, if she actually read the Treasury management reports that we published, she'd have seen that actually we haven't undertaken any prudential borrowing in the last 4 years. And in fact, the money that we've put aside prudently has been used to, the interest from the cash balances has been included as one-off contributions to our general fund. Now, I'd like to thank Phil Triggs and his team for their diligent work in this area. To be or not to be? That is the question that councillors must answer about this Treasury Management Strategy statement. I commend this report to the council and would urge them all to support it. Thankfully, you can all see there is nothing rotten in the state of Hammersmith and Fulham. Thank you very much.
Any other speakers? No. Are the in the report and its recommendations agreed? The recommendations carried. Sorry. Right, we need to have a vote. Those in favour? Against? Not voting.
The report agreed.
432, against 9, nobody vote. It's carried. The review of the Constitution, item 6.7. A call? Oh, I'm so sorry. Item 6.6, pay policy statement 25-26. A call on the Cabinet Member for Finance and Reform, Councillor Rowan Reid, to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
Are there any speakers? No. Is the report and its recommendations agreed? The recommendations are carried. No, we need a vote. All four, please. Against? Not voting. Okay, it's 32 against 9. No, not voting. The recommendations are carried. Item 6.7, review of the Constitution. A call on the leader to move the report and its recommendations.
Formally moved.
It's a report and its recommendations agreed. Bye.
We've woken up.
You agree? Everybody agrees. Thank you. The recommendations are carried. This is the end of tonight's meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching. Good night.